They said she was ruined, worthless, a woman so broken that even her own fiancé threw her aside like damaged cloth. But when Rhea Ashford walked into the throne room of the most dangerous man in the realm and demanded he become her husband, she didn't just shock the kingdom, she changed it forever. This is the story of a seamstress who had nothing left to lose, an alpha king who bowed to no one, and the 9 days that turned a desperate gamble into a love that shook the foundations of power itself. If you want to see how a disgraced woman became a queen through sheer courage and cunning, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Now, let's begin. The iron doors of the Northern Wolf Dominion's throne hall were built to withstand sieges, not to welcome guests. They stood 3 men tall, bound in black steel and wolf-headed rivets, and when they opened, they groaned like something wounded. Most people who passed through them came bearing tributes, alliances, or desperate pleas for mercy. Rhea Ashford brought none of those things. She brought rage. The hall stretched before her like the throat of a beast, cold stone, high-vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, and a throne at the far end that seemed less a seat than a declaration of war. Torches burned in iron sconces along the walls, their flames twisting in the draft that swept down from the mountain passes outside. The air smelled of pine smoke, old iron, and something darker. Power, maybe, or blood. Rhea's boots clicked against the stone as she walked, each step echoing in the silence. She didn't hesitate. Hesitation was what got you killed in places like this, or worse, dismissed. And she'd been dismissed enough for one lifetime. The throne room wasn't empty. Courtiers lined the walls like crows on a fence, watching, whispering. Their eyes tracked her with the kind of hunger that came from boredom and cruelty in equal measure. She recognized a few faces, minor nobles from the western provinces, merchants who'd grown fat on trade routes they didn't deserve, ladies in silk who'd never worked a day in their lives but felt entitled to judge everyone who had. Let them look, let them whisper. She had nothing left for them to take. At the center of the room, seated on a throne carved from a single piece of black mountain stone, sat Kaelin Varkas, the Alpha King of the North, the Wolf Lord, the man who'd united the frontier clans through a combination of strategic brilliance and absolute terrifying violence. He was broad-shouldered and still, dressed in dark furs and leather, his face sharp-planed and unreadable. His eyes were the color of winter ice, pale and cold, and they tracked her approach with the focus of a predator watching something small and foolish wander into range. Rhea stopped 10 paces from the throne. Protocol said she should kneel. Protocol said she should lower her eyes and wait for permission to speak. She did neither. "I need you to marry me," she said. The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone laughed, a high, brittle sound from somewhere near the back of the hall. It was followed by another, then another, until the whole room rippled with barely suppressed amusement. The courtiers weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They leaned toward each other, hands covering mouths, eyes bright with mockery. Rhea didn't look at them. She kept her gaze locked on the king. Kaelin Varkas hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. But something had shifted in his expression, some minute tightening around his eyes that might have been interest or irritation. It was hard to tell. "You need me," he repeated slowly, "to marry you." "Yes. And you are?" "Rhea Ashford." The name meant nothing to him. Why would it? She was nobody. A seamstress from a middling town on the western edge of the kingdom, the kind of place where nothing important ever happened and no one important ever came from. She'd spent her life bent over fabric, stitching beauty for other people to wear, creating worth for everyone but herself. Until 6 months ago, she'd been engaged. Promised to a man named Victor Halrin, a rising star among the Western gentry. Handsome, ambitious, connected to families that mattered. She'd thought herself lucky. She'd thought he loved her. She'd been wrong. Victor had broken their engagement 3 weeks before the wedding, citing vague concerns about compatibility and future prospects. In reality, he'd found someone better. Lady Isolde Farron, daughter of a powerful noble house with land, titles, and political influence that a seamstress could never provide. The engagement had been announced within days. The wedding was set for 9 days from now. And Victor, in a final act of cruelty that still made her stomach turn, had sent Rhea an invitation. You are cordially invited to witness the union of Victor Halloran and Lady Isolde Farron. He wanted her there, wanted her to sit among the guests and watch him marry someone else, wanted her to feel small and worthless and broken in front of everyone who'd ever known them. It was a public execution disguised as a social event. Rhea had spent 2 weeks staring at that invitation, feeling the weight of it like a stone on her chest. She'd thought about ignoring it, about burning it, about leaving town entirely and starting over somewhere no one knew her name. But every option felt like surrender, like admitting he'd been right to discard her, like agreeing that she was exactly as worthless as he wanted her to feel. So she'd come here instead. Kalen Varkas leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the arms of his throne. His hands were scarred, she noticed. Old wounds, layered over each other like a map of violence. You walk into my hall, he said quietly, without appointment or introduction. You make no attempt at courtesy, and you demand I marry you. He paused. Have you lost your mind, girl? Possibly, Rhea said, but I don't think so. Then explain. She took a breath, steadied herself. In 9 days, my former fiancé is marrying into the Farron family. He sent me an invitation, not because he wants me there, but because he wants to humiliate me. He wants me to sit in that hall and watch him succeed while I fail. He wants everyone to see that I wasn't good enough. And this concerns me how? Because I won't give him that satisfaction, Rhea said, her voice hardening. I won't go alone. I won't go weak. I want to walk into that wedding with someone who makes Victor Halloran look like exactly what he is, small, petty, and irrelevant. The corner of Kalen's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile. So you want me as, what? A prop? An accessory to make your former lover jealous? I want you as my husband. The laughter started again, louder this time. One of the courtiers, a thin man with a weasel's face, actually wiped tears from his eyes. Another, a woman in emerald silk, leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made them both snort with derision. Kalen raised one hand. The laughter stopped like he'd cut a thread. You understand what you're asking, he said. It wasn't a question. I do. I am the Alpha King of the North. Men kneel when I enter a room. Nations reconsider their borders when I look at a map. I have turned down marriage proposals from queens and empresses. His eyes narrowed. And you think I would agree to marry a seamstress from nowhere, for no reason other than to help you settle a petty grievance with a man I've never met? Rhea met his gaze without flinching. Yes. Why? Because you're bored. The words hung in the air like a blade suspended above a table. Kalen Varkas went very, very still. Rhea pressed on, her heart hammering, but her voice steady. You've spent the last decade consolidating power, crushing rivals, building an empire that no one dares challenge. You've won, completely, and now you sit on this throne, listening to merchants argue about trade tariffs and nobles beg for titles they don't deserve, and you're bored out of your mind. One of the courtiers gasped. Another stepped back as if physically struck. Kalen said nothing. You don't need another political alliance, Rhea continued. You don't need land or gold or heirs. What you need is something interesting, something unexpected. And I'm offering you exactly that. By marrying you. By marrying me and coming to that wedding as my husband. Imagine it, the Alpha King himself appearing at a minor Western noble's wedding on the arm of the woman everyone thinks is worthless. The chaos, the confusion, the sheer absurdity of it. She allowed herself a small, dangerous smile. Tell me that wouldn't be more entertaining than another council meeting about grain distribution. For a long moment, Kalen Varkas stared at her. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone and winter wind. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Then he stood. He was taller than she'd expected, broad and solid in a way that made the throne behind him look small. He descended the 3 steps from the dais slowly, deliberately, his boots heavy on the stone. When he stopped in front of her, he was close enough that she could see the faint scars on his jaw, the silver threading through the dark hair at his temples, the coldness in his eyes that wasn't entirely human. You have courage, he said quietly. Or stupidity. I haven't decided which. Does it matter? He studied her for another long moment. Then, without taking his eyes off hers, he spoke to the room. Clear the hall. Your Majesty, one of the courtiers began. Now! They scattered like leaves before a storm. Within seconds, the great doors boomed shut, and Rhea was alone with the most dangerous man in the kingdom. Kaelin circled her slowly, his gaze assessing. You want me to marry you and escort you to a wedding. For 9 days, I would play the role of your devoted husband, making you appear valuable in the eyes of people who mean nothing to me. And at the end of those 9 days, what? We annul the marriage and go our separate ways? Yes. And what do I get in return? Rhea turned to keep him in her sight. Entertainment, chaos, the satisfaction of watching me destroy the man who thought he could humiliate me. Not enough. Then name your price. He stopped in front of her again. My council has been pressuring me for years to take a wife, to secure the succession, to form alliances, to stabilize the realm through marriage. His lip curled slightly. I've refused every candidate they've presented. Princesses, duchesses, ladies with impeccable bloodlines and political connections. All of them. He paused. If I marry you, even temporarily, it sends a message that I am no longer available, that the matter is settled. Rhea's breath caught. You want to use this marriage to get them off your back. I want to use this marriage to make it clear that I will marry who I choose, when I choose, and for reasons that have nothing to do with politics or bloodlines. His eyes glinted. Your little revenge scheme provides the perfect cover. No one will suspect a temporary arrangement if we make it look passionate, impulsive, a love match. A love match, Rhea repeated slowly. Can you play the part? She thought about Victor, about the way he'd looked at her in those final weeks, like she was a mistake he was correcting, a poor investment he was cutting loose. She thought about the invitation, the deliberate cruelty of it, the assumption that she would come crawling or stay away in shame. Yes, she said, I can play the part. Kaelin smiled then. It was a wolf's smile, sharp and predatory, and entirely too interested. Then we have an agreement. He extended his hand. Rhea hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then she took it. His grip was warm, calloused, and absolutely sure. The moment their hands touched, she felt something shift, some fundamental reordering of the world around her. This was no longer a gamble. This was no longer a desperate ploy. This was a declaration of war. 9 days, Kaelin said. We have 9 days to prepare, to make this convincing, to ensure that when we walk into that wedding hall, no one doubts for a second that you belong at my side. And after? After we end it cleanly. No scandal, no drama, just a quiet annulment and a return to our separate lives. He released her hand. But until then, you are mine, my wife, my partner, my equal in every public space. Do you understand? Rhea nodded. I understand. Good. He turned toward the doors, then paused. One more thing. Yes? If you're going to be my wife, even temporarily, you'll need to look the part. His gaze swept over her plain wool dress, her worn boots, her hair pinned back with wooden combs. We'll start tomorrow. Lessons in court etiquette, proper dress, how to carry yourself among people who will be looking for any excuse to tear you down. I know how to carry myself. You know how to carry yourself as a seamstress, Kaelin corrected. I need you to carry yourself as a queen. The word hit her like a stone. Queen. Not lady, not consort. Queen. I'll be ready, she said. You'd better be. He moved toward the doors, then stopped again. And Rhea? Yes? Don't make me regret this. Then he was gone, the doors booming open and shut behind him, leaving her alone in the vast throne room with her heart pounding and her hands shaking and the sudden, terrifying certainty that she'd just set something in motion that she couldn't control. But she'd done it. She'd walked into the lion's den and walked out with a king. Shouts. The next morning arrived cold and sharp, the kind of dawn that cut through wool and settled into bones. Rhea woke in a guest chamber of the northern keep, a room larger than her entire cottage back home, with stone walls hung with tapestries depicting wolf hunts and mountain battles. A fire burned in the hearth, tended by servants she hadn't heard enter. She was still processing the reality of it. Yesterday, she'd been a disgraced seamstress. Today, she was the king's betrothed. A knock at the door. Before she could answer, a woman entered. Tall, gray-haired, with the kind of bearing that suggested she'd been giving orders since before Rhea was born. She wore simple but elegant clothes, dark wool and silver fastenings, and her eyes were sharp as winter stars. "I am Mira," the woman said without preamble. "The king has tasked me with preparing you for court. We begin immediately." "Preparing me how?" "Everything. How you walk, how you speak, how you hold a wine glass, how you enter a room. The nobles will be watching for weakness. We will give them none." Rhea stood, smoothing her borrowed nightdress. "I'm not weak." "I didn't say you were," Mira replied, "but there's a difference between personal strength and political armor. You have the first. I'm here to teach you the second." She gestured toward the door. "Come. We have work to do." The next 9 days became a gauntlet. Mira was relentless. She drilled Rhea on posture until her back ached, on proper forms of address until the titles blurred together, on the subtle hierarchies of seating arrangements and introduction orders, and which bow meant respect versus which meant submission. They practiced walking, not the quick, efficient stride of a working woman, but the measured, deliberate pace of someone who knew every eye was on her and didn't care. "Head up," Mira snapped during one session. "You're not apologizing for existing. You're commanding space." Rhea adjusted, lifting her chin. "Better. Again." They worked on speech patterns. Rhea's accent wasn't strong, but Mira refined it anyway, smoothing the rough edges, teaching her to modulate tone and pace. "You're not explaining yourself to them," Mira said. "You're informing them. There's a difference." The lessons weren't just about appearances. Mira taught her the politics of the Western provinces, who held power, who wanted it, where the old alliances lay and where the new ambitions festered. She explained the Farron family's position, their wealth built on textile trade and strategic marriages, their influence stretching across 3 provinces. "Victor Halloran is marrying up," Mira explained over afternoon tea on the second day. "The Farrons have been nobility for 8 generations. He's the son of a successful merchant, wealthy, yes, but common blood. This marriage elevates him significantly. And me showing up with the king undermines all of that," Rhea said slowly. "It doesn't just undermine it," Mira corrected. "It obliterates it. Victor will have married into an old noble house. You will have married into the throne. There's no comparison." Rhea sipped her tea, processing. "You think he'll try to retaliate somehow?" "I think he'll try to save face. Whether that means ignoring you entirely or attempting to discredit you in front of the other guests, I can't say. But you need to be ready for anything." On the 3rd day, a team of seamstresses arrived. Bitterly ironic, Rhea thought, and spent hours taking measurements, draping fabrics, arguing over colors and cuts. They created gowns unlike anything Rhea had ever worn, deep midnight blue with silver threading, crimson silk with black lace, emerald green that made her eyes look like stormlight. Each dress was a weapon, designed to catch attention and hold it. "The king wants you to look like you belong at his side," the head seamstress explained, pinning fabric at Rhea's waist. "These will ensure no one questions that." Rhea watched in the mirror as the woman worked, transforming her from something ordinary into something striking. She recognized the quality of the stitching, the precision of the cuts. These weren't just beautiful gowns. They were masterworks. "Who designed these?" she asked. The head seamstress smiled slightly. "You're looking at her." "They're extraordinary." "They're tools," the woman corrected. "Beautiful tools, but tools nonetheless. Wear them well." On the 4th day, Mira introduced her to weapons. "I'm going to a wedding," Rhea protested as Mira led her to the keep's armory. "Not a battlefield." In court, they're the same thing. Mira selected a small dagger from the wall, elegant and deadly. "You won't wear this openly, but you'll have it on you at all times, just in case." "In case of what?" "In case someone mistakes kindness for weakness. In case you're cornered somewhere without the king nearby." In case you need to make a point. Mira pressed the dagger into Rhea's hand. I'm not saying you'll use it. I'm saying you'll have the option. The blade was lighter than Rhea expected, perfectly balanced. She turned it over, examining the craftsmanship. Have you ever used one? Mira asked. I've cut fabric for 15 years. I understand sharp edges. Fabric doesn't fight back. Rhea met her gaze. Neither will anyone stupid enough to corner me. Mira's expression shifted, something that might have been approval. Good. Now, let me show you where to hide it in those dresses. On the 5th day, Kaylin himself appeared during her lessons. Rhea was in the middle of a particularly tedious drill on wine service, which glass for which vintage, how to hold the stem, the proper angle for pouring, when the door opened and the Alpha King walked in. Mira immediately bowed. Your Majesty. Leave us, Kaylin said. Mira hesitated for only a moment, then gathered her things and departed, closing the door behind her. Rhea set down the wine glass carefully. Something wrong? That depends, Kaylin said, crossing the room toward her. Are you planning to bore our enemies to death with wine etiquette? Despite herself, Rhea smiled. Mira seems to think it's important. Mira thinks everything is important. It's why she's good at her job. He picked up the wine glass she'd set down, examined it, then drank from it in one smooth motion, completely ignoring every rule Mira had spent the morning teaching. But you and I need to talk about something more critical. Which is? Chemistry. Rhea blinked. I'm sorry? Kaylin set the glass down and turned to face her fully. We can teach you to walk like a queen and dress like one. We can drill you on titles and protocols until you could recite them in your sleep. But none of that will matter if people don't believe we're in love. The word hung between them, suddenly heavy. And how? Rhea asked carefully. Do we make them believe that? By making it look effortless. He stepped closer. When we're in public, at dinners, receptions, the wedding itself, we need to appear completely comfortable with each other. Not like strangers playing a role, like two people who can't imagine being apart. You want us to practice being in love. I want us to practice the appearance of it, yes. His gaze was steady, clinical. Small touches. Eye contact. The way we stand near each other. All of it needs to look natural. Rhea's heart was beating faster than she wanted to admit. And you think we can fake that convincingly? I think we can try. He extended his hand. Dance with me. What? There will be dancing at the wedding. We should look like we've done it before. There was no music, but when Rhea placed her hand in his, Kaylin pulled her into position with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. His other hand settled at her waist, warmed through the fabric of her dress. Follow my lead, he said quietly. They moved through the empty room in silence, their steps finding a rhythm without accompaniment. Kaylin was a better dancer than Rhea had expected, smooth, controlled, guiding her through turns and patterns with minimal effort. She'd danced before, at village festivals and harvest celebrations, but never like this. Never with someone who moved like every step was a calculated decision. You're tense, he observed. I'm dancing with a king who could have me executed if he wanted. I'm not going to execute you, Rhea. That's comforting. His mouth quirked slightly. Relax. If we look stiff together, people will notice. She tried, forced her shoulders to drop, her grip to soften. They turned through another pattern, and gradually she began to find the rhythm, to anticipate his movements. Better? Kaylin said. Now look at me. She'd been watching their feet. When she raised her eyes to his, the sudden intensity of his gaze nearly made her stumble. This close, she could see flecks of darker blue in the pale ice of his irises, could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, could feel the heat of him through her dress. When we're in public, he said quietly, still moving them through the dance, you need to look at me like I'm the only person in the room. That sounds like something out of a romance novel. It's also how people in love actually look at each other. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. Can you do that? Rhea held his gaze, forced herself not to look away, even though every instinct screamed that looking directly at an apex predator was a terrible idea. Can you? Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of something that might have been respect or surprise or challenge accepted. Yes, he said. They danced in silence for another minute. Then Kaylin stopped, releasing her and stepping back. The sudden absence of his warmth left Rhea feeling oddly bereft. That will do for today, he said, but we'll practice again tomorrow and the day after, until it's second nature. Understood. He moved toward the door, then paused. Mira says you're doing well, better than expected. I'll try not to let that go to my head. Kaylin almost smiled. Good. Confidence is useful. Arrogance will get you killed. Then he was gone, and Rhea was alone again with her racing heart and the lingering warmth of his hand at her waist. The days blurred together after that. More lessons, more drills, more practiced conversations, and carefully orchestrated moments of false intimacy. Kaylin appeared regularly now, joining her for meals, walking with her through the keep's gardens, sitting across from her during evening discussions that ranged from politics to philosophy to the best way to prepare venison. He was testing her, she realized, seeing how she handled herself in conversation, how quickly she absorbed information, whether she could hold her own in debates with someone who'd spent decades outthinking his enemies. To her surprise, she could. You're well read, Kaylin observed one evening over dinner. They were alone in a small dining chamber, a concession to the fiction that they were newlyweds who preferred private time together. I worked in a shop next to a bookbinder, Rhea explained. He let me borrow anything I wanted as long as I returned it undamaged. And what did you read? Everything. Histories, philosophies, poetry. Stories about places I'd never see and people I'd never meet. She paused. It made my world bigger than four walls and a sewing table. Kaylin studied her over his wine glass. You were wasted as a seamstress. I was good at it. I don't doubt that. But you were still wasted. The compliment caught her off guard. Most people, including Victor, had treated her work as something quaint, a useful skill for a woman, nothing more. Kaylin spoke like he actually believed she'd been capable of more. What would you have done instead? He asked. If you could have chosen anything? Rhea considered. I don't know. Something that mattered. Something that changed things instead of just existing around them. And now? Now I'm marrying a king despite my ex-fiancé. She raised her glass in mock toast. I'm not sure that counts as meaningful contribution to society. Don't underestimate spite, Kaylin said. It's toppled empires. They both drank to that. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. Books they'd both read, places they'd traveled, childhood memories that seemed impossibly distant. Kaylin spoke rarely about his past, but when he did, Rhea caught glimpses of something beneath the cold exterior. A boy who'd lost his parents young. A teenager thrust into leadership before he was ready. A man who'd learned that showing weakness meant death. You never had a choice, she said quietly. No one has a choice about the circumstances they're born into, only what they do with them. And you chose to become this. I chose to survive, Kaylin corrected. Everything else followed from that. On the sixth day, they practiced public appearances. Mira arranged for a small dinner with some of the keep's senior staff, a trial run, she called it. Rhea and Kaylin entered the dining hall together, his hand at the small of her back, and immediately every eye in the room locked onto them. Rhea felt the weight of their scrutiny like physical pressure, but she remembered Mira's lessons. Head up, shoulders back, move like you own the space. Kaylin pulled out her chair, a gesture of courtesy that seemed almost tender. When she sat, he leaned down and murmured something in her ear. Meaningless words, but to anyone watching it looked intimate, personal. The dinner proceeded smoothly. Rhea engaged in conversation with the officials, answering questions about her background with the carefully edited version she and Mira had prepared. Yes, she'd been a seamstress. Yes, she'd met the king by chance. Yes, it had been sudden. But when you know, you know. The lies came easier than she'd expected. Across the table, Kaylin watched her with those winter-ice eyes, and when their gazes met, she saw something there that might have been approval, or possession. It was hard to tell the difference. After dinner, as they walked back through the keep's corridors, Kaylin spoke quietly. You did well tonight. I followed the script. You did more than that. You made them believe it. Rhea glanced at him. Did I make you believe it? He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. That's a dangerous question. Why? Because I'm not sure you want the answer. They stood there in the dim corridor, close enough that Rhea could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the pulse at his throat, could smell leather and pine and something uniquely him. Try me, she said. Kalen's hand came up, his fingers brushing her cheek in a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible coming from a man capable of such violence. You're playing a role, Rhea. Don't forget that. Are you reminding me or yourself? His hand dropped. Both of us, maybe. Then he stepped back, the moment breaking like ice cracking underfoot. Get some rest. We leave at dawn. He walked away, leaving Rhea alone in the corridor, with her heart racing and the ghost of his touch still warm on her skin. On the 8th day, Mira declared Rhea ready. You move like them now, she said, watching Rhea cross the room with the measured grace they'd practiced for days. You speak like them. When you enter that wedding hall, they'll see someone who belongs there. She paused. The king chose well. It's temporary, Rhea reminded her. Mira's expression was unreadable. Of course it is. That evening, Kalen summoned Rhea to his private study. It was a smaller room than the throne hall, but no less intimidating, walls lined with books and maps, a massive desk covered in correspondence, weapons hung on racks like art. A fire burned low in the hearth. Kalen stood at the window, looking out over the mountains. He didn't turn when she entered. Tomorrow we leave for the wedding, he said. Once we arrive, everything changes. Every word, every gesture, every look will be scrutinized. There's no privacy, no room for mistakes. I understand. Do you? He turned then, and his expression was serious. These people, the ones who will be at that wedding, they're vipers. They survive by finding weakness and exploiting it. Your former fiancé will try to rattle you. Others will test you, looking for cracks in the facade. I won't break. I know you won't. He crossed to his desk, opened a drawer, and removed a small box. But just in case, I want you to remember something. He opened the box. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a ring. It wasn't delicate or decorative. The band was heavy silver, carved with wolf designs that wrapped around each other in an endless pattern. Set in the center was a dark stone. Not a diamond, something else. Something that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. This, Kalen said quietly, belonged to my mother. She wore it when she ruled the northern clans before me. It's been in my family for 12 generations. Rhea stared at it. I can't wear that. You can. You will. He lifted the ring from the box. This isn't just jewelry, Rhea. It's a statement. Anyone who sees this ring will know exactly who you are and who stands with you. He took her left hand, the gesture now familiar after days of practice, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the weight of it substantial and oddly comforting. Tomorrow, Kalen said, still holding her hand, we walk into that wedding hall and we show them exactly what happens when they underestimate you. Understood? Rhea looked down at the ring, then back up at him. Understood. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so small and unconscious she wasn't sure he realized he'd done it. Then he released her hand and stepped back. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow, we go to war. They left at dawn. The journey to the wedding took most of the day, a ride through mountain passes and forested valleys, the landscape gradually softening from harsh northern peaks to gentler western hills. Kalen rode beside her, his presence a constant reminder of exactly how insane this entire plan was. But it was too late for second thoughts now. The traveling party was small, just Kalen and Rhea, along with a handful of guards who kept a respectful distance. Kalen had insisted on minimal escort. We're not invading, he'd said. We're attending a wedding. The smaller the party, the less threatening we appear. And the less threatening we appear, Rhea had asked, the more shocking it is when we dominate the room anyway. Now, watching the landscape roll past, Rhea found herself rehearsing everything she'd learned. The correct forms of address, the proper way to enter a room, how to deflect insults with grace, how to stand next to a king and look like she belonged there. Stop thinking so hard, Kaelin said, breaking the silence. I can hear it from here. I'm preparing. You're spiraling. There's a difference. Rhea shot him a look. Easy for you to say. You've been doing this your entire life. And you've been doing this for 9 days. Yet Mira says you're ready, and I trust her judgment. He glanced at her. The question is, do you trust your own? Did she? Rhea thought about the woman who'd walked into that throne room 9 days ago, desperate, angry, with nothing to lose. She thought about the woman she was now, still angry, but armored in silk and steel, wearing a dead queen's ring, riding beside a king who'd agreed to her insane plan. Yes, she said, I trust myself. Good. Then stop rehearsing and start believing. They rode in silence for a while longer. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and gradually the tension in Rhea's shoulders began to ease. She watched Kaelin from the corner of her eye, the way he sat his horse with unconscious grace, the way his gaze constantly scanned their surroundings, never fully at rest. Even here, on a peaceful road through safe territory, he was alert, ready. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. I may not answer. Why did you really agree to this? Kaelin was quiet for a long moment. I told you, to get the council off my back about marriage. That's part of it, but not all of it. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. You're perceptive. You're avoiding the question. Yes, I am. He looked forward again. Maybe someday I'll answer it, but not today. Fair enough. Rhea let it drop. As they crested the final hill and saw the Farron estate spread out below them, a sprawling complex of stone buildings and manicured gardens already filling with carriages and guests, Rhea felt her stomach tighten. Somewhere down there, Victor was waiting, expecting her to arrive alone and humiliated, expecting her to be the same woman he'd discarded. She touched the ring on her finger, felt its weight. She wasn't that woman anymore. Ready? Kaelin asked quietly. Rhea straightened in her saddle, lifted her chin. Let every lesson, every drill, every practiced moment settle into place like armor. Ready? She said. They rode down toward the estate together, and with every step, Rhea could feel the eyes turning toward them. The whispers starting, the recognition dawning. The Alpha King had come to the wedding, and the woman everyone thought was worthless rode at his side wearing his ring. The game had begun. The guards at the Farron estate gates didn't stop them, but their eyes widened when they recognized the wolf sigil on Kaelin's cloak. One of them actually stumbled backward, nearly dropping his halberd. The other managed a shaky bow before sprinting toward the main house, presumably to alert someone important that the Alpha King had just arrived unannounced. Rhea kept her spine straight as they rode through the gates. The estate grounds were immaculate, perfectly trimmed hedges, flowering gardens despite the season, white gravel paths that crunched under their horses' hooves. Everything screamed wealth and careful cultivation. Everything was designed to impress. It would take more than expensive landscaping to impress her now. Carriages lined the circular drive, their crests marking families from across the western provinces. Rhea recognized some of them from Mira's lessons. The Ashtons, the Greymarks, the Silverlakes. Old money, old names. People who'd spent generations believing their bloodlines made them superior to everyone else. People who were about to have a very interesting evening. A servant rushed out to meet them as they dismounted, his face flushed and his bow so deep it was almost comical. Your Majesty, we weren't informed you would be attending. If we'd known, we would have prepared appropriate. We're here as guests, Kaelin said smoothly, handing off his horse's reins. Not dignitaries. A simple seat at the ceremony will suffice. The servant's eyes darted to Rhea, taking in her traveling clothes, the ring on her finger, the way she stood close to the king. She could practically see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Of course, Your Majesty, and your companion. My wife, Kaelin said. The word dropped like a stone into still water. The servant's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I'm sorry, did you say, my wife? Kaelin repeated, his tone suggesting the servant might want to accept this information and move on. Lady Rhea of Arcus, I trust that won't be a problem. No, of course not, Your Majesty. I'll inform Lord and Lady Farron immediately. Please, if you'll follow me. They were led through the estate's main entrance, a grand affair of marble columns and vaulted ceilings that probably cost more than Rhea's entire hometown. More servants appeared, scurrying about with the kind of barely controlled panic that came from hosting someone you absolutely couldn't afford to offend. Rhea caught glimpses of other guests through open doorways. Ladies in expensive silks whispering behind fans, gentlemen in formal attire pretending not to stare. The news was spreading fast. She could feel it rippling through the house like a shockwave. The Alpha King was here, and he'd brought a wife no one had heard of. They were shown to a private sitting room to wait while the Pharaons were summoned. The moment the door closed behind the servant, Rhea let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Well," she said. "That was subtle." Kaelin moved to the window, looking out over the gardens where guests were beginning to gather for the ceremony. "Subtle wasn't the goal. Impact was." "You certainly achieved that." Rhea sat on one of the ornate chairs, glad for a moment to rest after the long ride. "Did you see that servant's face when you called me your wife?" "I saw everyone's face. They'll be talking about nothing else for the next hour." He glanced back at her. "Which is exactly what we want. By the time the ceremony starts, every person here will know you exist and will be dying to know who you are." "And when they find out I'm a seamstress?" "They'll find out you're a queen," Kaelin corrected. "What you were before doesn't matter. What you are now is all that counts." Before Rhea could respond, the door opened and a woman swept in with the kind of entrance that suggested she'd practiced it. Lady Farron, Rhea assumed, tall, elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair, and the kind of face that had probably been beautiful once and was now merely handsome. Her dress was ice blue silk, perfectly tailored, with enough jewelry to fund a small army. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Your Majesty," she said, executing a perfect curtsy. "What an unexpected honor. We had no idea you planned to attend." Kaelin inclined his head slightly. "Lady Farron, I hope our presence doesn't cause too much disruption." "Disruption? Not at all. We're delighted." Her gaze slid to Rhea, assessing. "Though I confess we weren't aware you'd married. The announcement must have escaped our notice." "It was a private affair," Kaelin said. "We preferred intimacy over spectacle." "How romantic." Lady Farron's smile sharpened. "And you are." Rhea stood, channeling every lesson Mira had drilled into her. "Rhea Varkas." "A pleasure to meet you, Lady Farron." "Varkas," the woman repeated slowly. "I'm not familiar with that family. Are you from the Northern Territories?" "Actually," Rhea said, keeping her voice level, "I'm from here, the Western Provinces, a town called Millbrook." Recognition flickered across Lady Farron's face. "Millbrook? How quaint." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Wait, Rhea, that name sounds familiar. Weren't you—" "Engaged to Victor Halloran," Rhea finished calmly. "Yes, before I met His Majesty, of course." The silence that followed was exquisite. Lady Farron's composure cracked just slightly, her smile freezing in place. "I see. How coincidental that you should attend his wedding." "Isn't it?" Rhea kept her expression pleasant. "Victor was kind enough to send an invitation. I thought it only polite to accept." Lady Farron looked between them, clearly trying to determine if this was some elaborate joke or political maneuver she hadn't anticipated. "Well, I'm sure Victor will be pleased to see you." The way she said it suggested Victor would be anything but pleased. "If you'll excuse me, I should inform him of your arrival. The ceremony begins in an hour. Please, make yourselves comfortable." She swept out, her composure restored but her movements just slightly too quick. The moment the door closed, Rhea let out a shaky laugh. "That went well," she said. Kaelin's expression was amused. "You handled that perfectly. Calm, direct, unbothered." "I'm bothered. I'm just hiding it well. That's all court is. Everyone's bothered. Everyone's hiding it." He moved away from the window. "Lady Farron is going to warn Victor. He'll have time to prepare before he sees you." "Is that a problem?" "It's an advantage. It means he'll be thinking about you during the ceremony instead of focusing on his bride. It means he'll make mistakes." Rhea stood, smoothing her traveling dress.
I should change before the ceremony. I can't exactly attend in riding clothes.
The servants will bring your things to a guest room. Take your time. Let them wait. He caught her hand as she moved past him, his grip warm and steady. And Rhea, whatever happens today, remember, you're not here to prove anything to him. You're here to prove something to yourself. She looked up at him, caught by the unexpected gentleness in his voice. What if I fail? You won't. He released her hand. But if you did, you'd still be my wife. That doesn't change based on Victor Halloran's opinion of you. The words shouldn't have meant as much as they did. This was an arrangement, a temporary alliance. But standing there in that borrowed room in a house full of enemies, Rhea felt something shift in her chest. Thank you, she said quietly. Kaelin nodded once, then turned back to the window, dismissing her in a way that was somehow kind rather than cold. Rhea left to prepare for war. The guest room they'd been given was almost insultingly luxurious. Four-poster bed, silk curtains, a view of the gardens where white chairs were being arranged in perfect rows for the ceremony. A servant had already unpacked Rhea's things, laying out the midnight blue gown with silver threading that Mira had insisted was perfect for the occasion. Rhea stood in front of the mirror as another servant helped her dress, pulling the laces tight, arranging the fabric, pinning her hair into an elegant arrangement that made her look like someone she didn't quite recognize. The gown fit perfectly, hugging her figure in ways that made her look powerful rather than delicate. The silver threading caught the light with every movement, drawing the eye. The ring on her finger looked right against the deep blue fabric, like it belonged there, like she belonged there. Rhea dismissed the servant and stood alone, studying her reflection. 9 days ago, she'd been nobody, a discarded woman in a borrowed room, trying to figure out how to survive the humiliation Victor had planned for her. Now she looked like a queen. The question was whether she could act like one. A knock at the door. Come in, Rhea called. Kaelin entered, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered across his face when he saw her. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. It was gone before she could name it. You look the part, he said. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, though yes, you look beautiful. The directness of it caught her off guard. Rhea felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned back to the mirror, pretending to adjust something in her hair. Thank you. The ceremony is about to start. We should take our seats. Together? Of course together. We're married, remember? He offered his arm. Ready to make an entrance? Rhea took a breath, then placed her hand on his arm. Through the fabric of his sleeve, she could feel the solid strength of him, the warmth. It was grounding. Ready. They descended the main staircase together, and Rhea felt every eye in the entrance hall lock onto them. The guests who'd arrived early, the servants preparing last-minute details, everyone stopped and stared. She heard the whispers start immediately, a susurrus of shock and speculation that followed them like a wave. Outside, the gardens had been transformed. White chairs arranged in neat rows, an archway covered in flowers at the front, musicians playing soft chamber music. It was beautiful in the way expensive things often were. Impressive, but somehow cold. Most of the seats were already filled. Rhea recognized faces from her old life. People from Millbrook and the surrounding towns, merchants Victor had worked with, families she'd seen at markets and festivals. People who'd known her as the seamstress. People who'd probably heard about the broken engagement and assumed she'd disappeared in shame. They weren't assuming that anymore. The whispers grew louder as Rhea and Kaelin walked down the aisle toward their seats. She kept her head high, her expression serene, exactly as Mira had taught her. Don't rush. Don't apologize. Command the space. A servant directed them to seats in the third row, an insult probably, given Kaelin's rank. The front rows were reserved for the Farron family and their closest allies. Kaelin smiled slightly. How considerate, he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. A perfect view without being intrusive. They sat, and immediately Rhea felt the weight of attention pressing down on her. People were craning their necks to get a better look, fans fluttering as ladies whispered to each other, men leaning close to murmur speculations. She caught fragments of conversation. That's really the king? Who is she? Wearing his mother's ring. Did you see? Victor's old fiancé. Can you imagine?
Kalen leaned close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Breathe, you're doing fine. I can feel them staring. Good. Let them stare. Let them wonder. His hand covered hers on the armrest, a gesture that looked tender but felt like steel. You have nothing to be ashamed of. The music changed, signaling the ceremony was about to begin. The crowd settled into expectant silence. Rhea's heart hammered against her ribs. Then Victor appeared at the front of the aisle, and everything else fell away. He looked the same. Sandy hair perfectly styled, tailored suit that probably cost more than she used to make in a year, that confident smile that had once made her think she was lucky to be chosen by him. He took his place under the flower arch, laughing at something the officiant said, completely at ease. He hadn't seen her yet. The music swelled. Lady Isolde appeared at the far end of the aisle on her father's arm, resplendent in white silk and lace. She was beautiful, classically so, with porcelain skin and golden hair and features that belonged on a painting. Everything Victor had wanted. Everything Rhea supposedly wasn't. The bride began her slow walk down the aisle. Every eye turned to watch her except Rhea's. She kept her gaze forward, waiting. It happened when Isolde was halfway down the aisle. Victor's eyes swept over the crowd in that self-satisfied way of someone who knew all these people had come to witness his triumph. His gaze passed over the third row, then snapped back. He saw her. The color drained from his face. His smile froze, then crumbled. For a moment he just stood there, staring, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. Then his eyes shifted to the man beside her, and Rhea watched Victor Halloran realize exactly who she'd brought to his wedding. To his credit, he didn't bolt, but his hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tightened, and Rhea could see the effort it took for him to drag his attention back to his approaching bride. Isolde, oblivious, smiled radiantly at him, clearly interpreting his tension as nervous emotion. Rhea felt Kalen's hand tighten on hers, a silent acknowledgement. They'd landed the first blow. The ceremony proceeded. Victor and Isolde exchanged vows that Rhea barely heard, her mind focused on the way Victor kept glancing in her direction, unable to help himself. His voice wavered twice during his vows. When the officiant pronounced them married and invited Victor to kiss his bride, the kiss was perfunctory, distracted. Isolde noticed. Rhea saw the flicker of confusion cross the bride's face as she pulled back from a kiss that clearly hadn't been what she'd expected on her wedding day. The guests applauded. The couple turned to face the crowd, and Victor's eyes went immediately to Rhea. She met his gaze calmly, her expression pleasant, unbothered. Then she turned to Kalen and smiled, a genuine smile, warmer than anything she'd ever given Victor. Kalen's response was immediate. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles just above his mother's ring, his eyes never leaving hers. It was a small gesture, but intimate, possessive. The message was clear. This is what devotion looks like. This is what you lost. Around them, the whispers intensified. Rhea caught more fragments. He's completely besotted. She must be remarkable. Poor Victor, imagine seeing your ex-fiancé married to the king. The newly married couple processed back down the aisle, Victor's smile now looking more like a grimace. As they passed Rhea's row, Isolde's eyes landed on her, then on Kalen, and Rhea saw the exact moment the bride realized something was very wrong with her perfect day. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom, a massive space with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. Long tables groaned under elaborate floral arrangements and place settings that probably cost more than most people's monthly wages. An orchestra played from a raised platform at one end of the room. Rhea and Kalen entered together, and conversation literally stopped. The effect rippled outward from the doorway like a stone thrown into water, clusters of guests falling silent, turning to look, mouths opening in shock or speculation or poorly concealed envy. "Your Majesty," a voice called. Lord Farron himself approached, a portly man with an ingratiating smile. "We're honored beyond words by your presence. Please, allow me to show you to your table." "That won't be necessary," Kalen said smoothly. "We'll find our own seats. But we've prepared a place for you at the head table with the family." "How thoughtful, but my wife and I prefer a quieter spot. We're here to celebrate, not to overshadow the happy couple." The way he said it made it clear that overshadowing was exactly what they were doing, deliberately. Lord Pharaoh's smile tightened, but he bowed, accepting the dismissal. They found a table near the windows, far enough from the head table to seem respectful, but positioned perfectly to watch the entire room. Other guests approached throughout the evening, some genuinely curious, others clearly fishing for gossip or trying to curry favor with the king. Rhea handled each interaction with the grace Mira had trained into her. Yes, she'd met His Majesty by chance. Yes, it had been a whirlwind romance. No, they hadn't set a date for a formal coronation ceremony yet. The lies flowed easily, each one building the fiction that she and Kaylin were deeply, genuinely in love. The dangerous part was how easy it was becoming to blur the line between performance and reality. When Kaylin's hand rested at the small of her back as they moved through the room, it felt natural. When he leaned close to murmur something in her ear, usually a sardonic observation about the guests, the warmth of his breath against her skin sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with acting. She was playing a role. She had to remember that. Dinner was served. Victor and Isolde sat at the head table, surrounded by the Farron family and their most important allies. Rhea could see Victor's jaw clenching as he pushed food around his plate, barely eating. Isolde kept trying to engage him in conversation, her smile becoming more strained with each monosyllabic response. "He's falling apart," Rhea observed quietly. "Good," Kaylin replied. "Men like him are only dangerous when they're confident. Once you shake that confidence, they crumble." "What about women like him?" Kaylin's expression turned thoughtful. "Women who build their worth on undermining others? They're more dangerous because they're usually smarter about it. But the same principle applies. Find what they're built on and kick out the foundation." As if summoned by their conversation, Lady Isolde herself approached their table. Up close, she was even more beautiful. Delicate features, perfect posture, a smile that was warm but didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your Majesty," she said with a graceful curtsy. "Lady Rhea, I wanted to personally thank you for attending our celebration." "Congratulations on your marriage," Kaylin said politely. "Thank you." Isolde's gaze shifted to Rhea, assessing. "I understand you and Victor were previously acquainted." "We were engaged," Rhea said calmly. "Briefly." "How interesting that you should attend his wedding, and with such distinguished company." The emphasis on the last words made it clear Isolde had figured out at least part of what was happening. "Victor mentioned you were a seamstress. You must have remarkable talents to have caught the king's attention." The insult was delicate, but clear. Rhea felt Kaylin tense beside her, but she touched his arm lightly, claiming this battle for herself. "I do have remarkable talents," Rhea said, her smile pleasant, "though sewing is the least of them. But surely you understand, your own family built their fortune on textiles, didn't they? There's no shame in honest work." Isolde's smile froze. Being compared to a common seamstress when your family's wealth came from textile trade was evidently not something she appreciated. "Of course not," Isolde said, her tone cooling. "Though I imagine there's quite a difference between managing textile empires and stitching individual garments." "Is there?" Kaylin interjected smoothly. "Both require precision, attention to detail, understanding of materials and how they work together. One is simply done on a larger scale. Though I've always found that people who actually understand the craft from the ground up make better leaders in their industries. Don't you agree?" It was a masterful redirect, turning Isolde's insult into praise for hands-on experience while subtly suggesting her family might lack that understanding. Isolde's cheeks flushed slightly. "I suppose that's one perspective," she said stiffly. "If you'll excuse me, I should return to my husband." She swept away, her posture rigid. Rhea let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That was dangerous," Kaylin said quietly. "She started it." "I know, and you finished it beautifully, but be careful. Wounded pride makes people reckless." As if to prove his point, Victor himself appeared at their table moments later. Rhea's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. "Rhea," Victor said, his voice tight. "Might I have a word? Privately?" "Anything you need to say to my wife can be said in front of me," Kaylin said, his tone pleasant but with an edge that suggested this was non-negotiable. Victor's jaw worked. "Of course, Your Majesty. I wouldn't dream of being inappropriate. He focused on Rhea. I just wanted to say, I'm surprised to see you here. You did invite me. I didn't think you'd actually come.
His eyes swept over her, taking in the expensive gown, the elaborate hairstyle, the ring. You look different. I am different. This is quite the statement you're making, showing up to my wedding with the Alpha King. His voice dropped. What exactly are you trying to prove? Rhea stood, drawing herself up to her full height. Every lesson from Mira, every practice conversation with Kaylin, every moment of the past 9 days crystallized into absolute certainty. I'm not trying to prove anything, Victor. You invited me here expecting me to be broken, small, ashamed of what you did to me. You wanted to parade your new wife in front of me and watch me fail. She smiled, cold and sharp. I'm simply showing you that you never had the power to break me in the first place. You were always too small for that. Victor's face flushed red. You're making a scene. Am I? I'm simply having a conversation at a wedding I was invited to. Rhea tilted her head. If my presence is causing you distress, perhaps you should examine why that is. I don't have to stand here and listen to this. You're right. You don't. Kaylin stood, moving to stand beside Rhea, his hand settling at her waist. You can return to your bride and try to salvage what's left of your wedding day. Or you can continue this conversation and confirm to everyone watching that you're more concerned with your ex-fiancé than your new wife. Victor glanced around and seemed to realize for the first time that their exchange had drawn attention. Other guests were watching, some openly, others pretending not to while clearly listening to every word. This isn't over, Victor said quietly. Yes, it is, Rhea replied. It was over the moment you sent me that invitation thinking I'd come here beaten. You just didn't realize it yet. Victor turned and stalked away, his shoulders rigid with barely controlled rage. Rhea sank back into her chair, her hands shaking slightly now that the confrontation was over. You were magnificent, Kaylin said softly. I wanted to hit him. I know, but this was better. You didn't just beat him, you humiliated him in front of everyone who matters to him. His hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. That wound will last much longer than anything physical. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Dancing began, and Kaylin led Rhea onto the floor for a waltz that drew every eye in the room. They moved together with the practiced ease of their rehearsals, but something was different now. The way Kaylin held her felt less like performance and more like possession. The way she leaned into him felt less like following instructions and more like instinct. When the dance ended, they remained close for a heartbeat longer than necessary before separating. We should leave soon, Kaylin said. We've made our point. Staying longer risks looking like we're gloating. Aren't we? Yes, but we should be subtle about it. They made their farewells to Lord and Lady Farron, who seemed relieved to see them go despite their protestations otherwise. As they walked toward the exit, Rhea caught one last glimpse of Victor standing near the head table, watching her leave with an expression of mingled fury and something that might have been regret. Let him regret it. Let him spend the rest of his life wondering what he'd thrown away. Outside, the night air was cool and clean after the close atmosphere of the ballroom. They walked toward the stables where their horses were being prepared for the journey back to the keep. You did well tonight, Kaylin said as they waited. Better than well. You were exactly what you needed to be. What's that? Yourself, but armored. Rhea looked up at him, this man who'd agreed to her insane plan, who'd spent 9 days training her to survive in his world, who'd just helped her destroy the man who'd tried to destroy her. Thank you, she said quietly, for all of this, for agreeing to this madness in the first place. It was mutually beneficial. Was it? You got your counsel off your back about marriage, but you also spent 9 days preparing someone you barely knew to face down her ex-fiancé. That's more than just mutual benefit. Kaylin was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. Maybe I wanted to see if you'd actually go through with it, if you had the spine to stand in front of all those people and claim your worth. And you do. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek in an echo of that moment in the corridor days ago. You always did. You just needed the armor to protect it. The touch sent heat through her despite the cool night air. Rhea's breath caught, and for a moment they stood there in the shadows, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the pulse at his throat, could imagine. A servant appeared with their horses, shattering the moment. Kaelin stepped back, the distance between them suddenly vast. "We should go," he said. "It's a long ride back." They mounted and rode out through the estate gates as the party continued behind them, neither of them speaking. But as they crested the hill and looked back at the Farron estate lit up against the darkness, Rhea allowed herself one small, satisfied smile. She'd done it. She'd walked into that wedding hall and shown everyone, Victor, the Farrons, all those sneering nobles, exactly what she was capable of. The question was what came next. The wedding was over. The performance was complete. In 9 days, this marriage was supposed to end. Rhea touched the ring on her finger, feeling its weight. She wasn't sure she wanted it to end anymore. And from the way Kaelin had looked at her tonight, from the way his touch had lingered just a moment too long, she didn't think he wanted it to end either. But neither of them said anything as they rode through the darkness toward the northern keep, the unspoken truth hanging between them like a blade suspended by a thread, waiting to fall. They reached the northern keep just before dawn, the sky lightening from black to deep blue over the mountain peaks. Rhea's body ached from the long ride, her mind spinning with exhaustion and adrenaline that hadn't quite faded. The wedding felt both impossibly distant and vividly present, Victor's face when he'd seen her, the weight of all those eyes, the way Kaelin's hand had felt against her waist, the way it still felt, even now in memory. Servants took their horses. Kaelin walked her to her chamber without speaking, the silence between them heavy with things neither seemed willing to say. At her door he paused. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll talk later about—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider. "We'll talk later." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the stone corridor, leaving Rhea alone with the ghost of his almost confession. She slept fitfully, her dreams a confused tangle of Victor's angry face and Kaelin's ice-blue eyes and the weight of a ring she wasn't supposed to want to keep wearing. When she woke, the sun was high, and someone had left food on a tray by her door. She ate mechanically, her mind already racing ahead to what came next. The agreement had been 9 days. The wedding was over. By all rights, they should be discussing annulment terms, figuring out how to dissolve this arrangement cleanly and without scandal. So why did the thought make her chest feel hollow? A knock at the door pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. "Come in." Mira entered, her expression carefully neutral. "His Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber, immediately." Something in her tone made Rhea's stomach drop. "What's happened?" "I'm not privy to council matters, but you should dress formally." Mira's eyes were serious, and quickly. 20 minutes later, Rhea entered the council chamber wearing one of her new gowns, deep forest green with gold accents. The room was circular, with high windows and a round table at its center where 8 men sat in various states of agitation. Kaelin stood at the head of the table, his expression carved from granite. Every eye turned to her as she entered. "Gentlemen," Kaelin said, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. "My wife." The title still sent a shock through her. One of the counselors, a thin man with iron-gray hair, stood abruptly. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, we requested a private council meeting." "And I requested my wife's presence," Kaelin replied calmly. "She's here. Continue." The counselor's jaw worked. "Very well. As I was saying, the situation in the western provinces has become complicated. Since your appearance at the Halrin-Ferran wedding yesterday, we've received no fewer than 17 messages from various noble houses, all expressing concern." "Concern about what?" Rhea asked, finding her voice. The counselor looked at her like she was a piece of furniture that had suddenly started talking. Kaelin's expression darkened. "Lord Brennan," he said quietly, "when my wife asks a question, you answer her, directly." Lord Brennan's face flushed, but he inclined his head stiffly. "Concern about the nature of your marriage, Lady Varkas. The speed of it. The lack of formal announcement. The fact that you come from common stock with no political connections, or the fact that I'm not one of them," Rhea interrupted. "That's what you mean. I mean that marriages of this significance are traditionally arranged to strengthen alliances, to unite powerful families, to treat people like chess pieces, Kaelin cut in. Yes, I'm aware of tradition. I'm also aware that I am king, and I will marry who I choose for whatever reasons I choose. Is that unclear? Of course not, Your Majesty, but the nobles are calling this marriage irregular. Some are suggesting it might even be illegitimate. The word hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. On what grounds? Kaelin's voice had gone very quiet, which somehow made it more dangerous. Another counselor spoke up, an older man with a weathered face. They're questioning whether proper protocols were followed, whether witnesses were present, whether the marriage was conducted by someone with appropriate authority. He hesitated. And they're questioning Lady Rhea's suitability. My suitability, Rhea repeated. Her hands clenched in her lap under the table. Because I used to sew clothes for a living. Because you have no family name, no dowry, no political value, Lord Brennan said bluntly. Your Majesty, we understand that passions can lead to hasty decisions, but this council has a responsibility to consider the stability of the realm. A marriage of this nature is none of your concern, Kaelin said, his voice like ice breaking. I didn't call this council to debate my marriage. I called it to inform you of a decision I've already made. The room went silent. Rhea felt her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 weeks from today, Kaelin continued, there will be a formal coronation ceremony. Rhea will be crowned Queen of the Northern Dominion before every noble house in the realm. They will witness her coronation, they will swear fealty to her, and they will accept her as my wife and their queen. Any questions about legitimacy or suitability will be answered then, permanently. Rhea's breath stopped. He was supposed to be talking about ending their arrangement. Instead, he was talking about making it permanent, making it real. The council erupted. Your Majesty, you can't be serious. This is madness. The nobles will revolt. They're already questioning your judgment. Enough. Kaelin's voice cracked through the chaos like a whip. I am your king. She is my wife. In 3 weeks, she will be your queen. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to challenge me directly. Otherwise, you will prepare for the coronation ceremony as ordered. Are we clear? Slowly, reluctantly, the counselors nodded. But their expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. This wasn't acceptance. This was submission through fear, and everyone in the room knew it. Good. You're dismissed. Lord Brennan, remain behind. The other counselors filed out, shooting looks at Rhea that ranged from curious to contemptuous. When the door closed behind the last one, Kaelin turned to Brennan. How many of them do you think will actually support this coronation? Brennan's expression was grim. Honestly, maybe 2. The rest will comply because they're afraid of you, but the moment they sense weakness, they'll move against her, against both of you. And the Western nobles, the ones sending concerned messages? They're terrified. Your appearance at that wedding wasn't just unexpected. It was a power play they didn't see coming. Some of them are trying to figure out how to curry favor with Lady Rhea now. Others are looking for ways to undermine her credibility. He paused. There's talk of refusing to attend the coronation, of declaring it illegitimate. Let them try. Kaelin's voice was cold. Anyone who refuses to attend will be considered an open rebellion. I'll deal with them accordingly. Your Majesty, you're talking about potential civil war over a marriage. I'm talking about establishing that I will not be controlled by a council of old men who think they have the right to choose my wife for me. Kaelin's gaze was hard. This ends now. Either they accept Rhea as queen, or they can test how much of my reputation is myth and how much is well-earned fact. Brennan looked between them, his expression troubled. I hope you know what you're doing, Your Majesty, because if this goes wrong, it won't just be your crown at stake. It'll be the entire kingdom. I'm aware of the stakes. You're dismissed. Brennan bowed and left, closing the door quietly behind him. The silence that followed felt enormous. Rhea stood slowly, her legs shaking. Kaelin, what are you doing? He turned to face her fully. Making a choice. This wasn't supposed to be permanent. We agreed. 9 days, the wedding, then an annulment. I know what we agreed. Then why? She gestured helplessly at the now empty council chamber. Why are you talking about a coronation? About making me queen?
That was never part of the plan. Plans change. Not like this. Not when it could start a war. Rhea moved closer, trying to read his expression. You can't crown me queen just to prove a point to your council. I'm not. He met her gaze steadily. I'm crowning you queen because you deserve to be queen. Because in 9 days you've shown more courage and intelligence than half the nobility shows in a lifetime. Because you walked into that wedding and proved that worth has nothing to do with bloodlines or titles. He paused. And because I don't want this marriage to end. The words hit her like a physical blow. Rhea's breath caught. You... what? I don't want to annul this marriage. I want to make it real. His voice was quiet but certain. Unless you want out. If you want to leave, I'll arrange the annulment quietly. No scandal, no repercussions. You'll be free. And if I stay, then you become queen.
You face down every noble who thinks you don't belong. You help me reshape this kingdom into something better than a collection of old families protecting old privileges. His expression softened slightly. And you stay married to me, for real this time. Rhea's mind was racing. This was insane. She'd come to him asking for a temporary arrangement, a way to get revenge on Victor. She'd never imagined it would become this. But standing here in this council chamber, wearing a gown that cost more than her old life, carrying the weight of his mother's ring, she realized she didn't want it to end either. They'll destroy me, she said quietly. The nobles, the council. They'll find every way possible to tear me down. They'll try. And if they succeed, then we'll deal with it together. Kaelin stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver in his dark hair, the scars on his jaw, the absolute certainty in his ice-blue eyes. I'm not asking you to do this alone, Rhea. I'm asking you to do it with me. She thought about the woman she'd been 9 days ago, broken, humiliated, with nothing left to lose. She thought about the woman who'd walked into Victor's wedding wearing armor made of silk and steel. She thought about what Kaelin had said that first night. What you were before doesn't matter. What you are now is all that counts. Yes, she said. Kaelin's expression shifted. Surprise, relief, something warmer. Yes? Yes, I'll stay. I'll become queen. I'll face down every noble who thinks I don't belong until they can't deny it anymore. She lifted her chin. But not because you're asking me to. Because I want to prove that I can. He smiled then, a real smile, not the cold political expression he wore for the court. There's the woman who stormed into my throne room and demanded I marry her. That woman was desperate and probably insane. That woman was brave. She still is. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring on her finger. 3 weeks. Can you be ready? For a coronation? For the entire kingdom to judge whether I'm worthy of being queen? Rhea laughed, slightly wild. Probably not, but I'll do it anyway. Good, because starting tomorrow, the real work begins. If you thought learning to walk like a queen was difficult, wait until you actually have to govern like one. He was right. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Mira's lessons intensified to the point of cruelty. Rhea spent hours each day studying the noble houses, their histories, their alliances, their grievances, their weaknesses. She learned the complex web of marriages and treaties that held the kingdom together. She studied military strategy, trade routes, agricultural policies, everything a queen would need to understand to rule effectively. The council meetings were worse. Kaelin insisted she attend every session, sitting at his right hand while the counselors debated everything from tax policies to border disputes. Some of them made token efforts to include her in discussions. Others ignored her completely, speaking around her as if she didn't exist. Lord Brennan was the worst. He questioned every opinion she offered, dismissed her suggestions with barely concealed contempt, and made it clear he considered her presence an insult to the council's dignity. After one particularly brutal session where Brennan had openly laughed at her proposed solution to a trade dispute, Rhea cornered Kaelin in his study. He's undermining me deliberately, she said without preamble. Every council meeting, he makes sure everyone knows he doesn't take me seriously. Kaelin looked up from the documents he'd been reviewing. I know. Then do something about it. Like what? Execute him for being rude? That would make you look weak, not strong. So I just have to sit there and take it? No, you have to prove him wrong. Kalen set down his pen. Brennan is testing you, so are the others. They want to see if you'll break, if you'll prove them right about you being unfit for this role. What if they are right? They're not, but the only way to make them see that is to outlast them, to keep showing up, keep offering solutions, keep refusing to be diminished by their contempt. He stood, moving around the desk to face her. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's necessary. Rhea wanted to argue, but she knew he was correct. Complaining wouldn't change anything, only results would. The next council meeting, when Brennan started his usual dismissive commentary, Rhea didn't react emotionally. Instead, she calmly laid out her reasoning with supporting evidence from the trade records she'd studied. When he tried to interrupt, she kept talking, her voice level and certain, until even Brennan had to acknowledge her points had merit. It was a small victory, but it was a victory. Not all the resistance came from inside the keep. Word of the upcoming coronation spread through the kingdom like wildfire, and the reactions were mixed. Some nobles sent cautious messages of support. Others sent thinly veiled threats. A few refused to respond at all, which was almost worse. Then the letters started arriving directly for Rhea. The first one appeared on her breakfast tray 3 days after the council announcement. No seal, no signature, just words scrawled on expensive parchment. You don't belong here. Leave before you destroy everything. She showed it to Kalen, who read it with a grim expression. This won't be the last one. He was right. Over the next week, more letters arrived. Some were warnings. Others were cruder. Insults about her common blood, suggestions about what she must have done to seduce the king, threats of what would happen if she went through with the coronation. Rhea burned each one and kept working. But the night before a crucial meeting with representatives from the western provinces, the same nobles who'd attended Victor's wedding, Rhea found a letter that was different from the others. It wasn't anonymous. It was signed by Lady Isolde Farron. Lady Rhea, I'm writing to offer a warning from one woman to another. The path you've chosen is dangerous. The nobles will never accept you, no matter how many crowns you wear. You're threatening everything they've built, everything they believe about how power should work. I don't know what hold you have over the king, but it won't last. When he tires of you, and he will, you'll have nothing. No family, no fortune, no allies, just enemies. For your own sake, consider negotiating an exit while you still can. I could help arrange it. A generous settlement, a quiet departure, your reputation intact. Think about it. I.F. Rhea read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking with rage. Isolde was trying to sound concerned, but the message was clear. Leave, or we'll destroy you. She took the letter directly to Kalen's study. He was working late, surrounded by maps and documents. He looked up when she entered, took one look at her face, and stood. What happened? She handed him the letter wordlessly, watched his expression darken as he read. Isolde Farron, he said quietly. Interesting. She's threatening me. She's trying to scare you into leaving. There's a difference. He set the letter down. The question is, will it work? No. The certainty in Rhea's voice surprised even her. I'm not leaving. Not because she threatened me. Not because the council hates me. Not because anonymous cowards send me hate mail. She met Kalen's gaze. I'm staying. And I'm going to that meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to show every single one of those Western nobles exactly who I am now. Kalen's expression shifted into something that might have been pride. Then let's make sure you're ready. They spent the next 4 hours preparing. Kalen walked her through every noble who would be attending, their political positions, their vulnerabilities. He coached her on how to handle hostile questions, how to redirect conversations, how to project authority without seeming aggressive. They'll try to provoke you, he warned. They'll bring up your past, your lack of experience, probably Victor if they're feeling particularly cruel. Don't react emotionally. Don't defend yourself. Just acknowledge the facts and move forward. Acknowledge that I used to be a seamstress. Acknowledge that you understand their concerns, and then demonstrate why those concerns are irrelevant. He leaned back against his desk. You're not trying to convince them you're one of them. You're trying to convince them you're something better. The meeting the next day was held in the keep's formal reception hall. 12 nobles from the western provinces, all dressed in their finest, all wearing expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Rhea recognized several faces from Victor's wedding. She entered with Kaelin, her spine straight, her expression serene. They'd chosen her outfit carefully, a gown in deep burgundy, rich but not ostentatious, paired with minimal jewelry except for Kaelin's mother's ring. The message was clear. I don't need to impress you. I already have the only approval that matters. Lord Farron stood when they entered, his bow perfunctory. Your Majesty, Lady Rhea. The pause before her name was deliberate. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Of course, Kaelin said smoothly. I'm always interested in hearing concerns from the provinces. They settled around a long table. Rhea could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing down on her. These weren't random nobles. These were people who'd seen her at Victor's wedding, who knew exactly who she'd been before. A woman in silver silk spoke first. Lady Ashton, Rhea remembered. Your Majesty, we're grateful for this audience, but we must speak frankly. This coronation you've announced has caused considerable distress among the Western families. Distress about what specifically? Rhea asked before Kaelin could respond. Lady Ashton's eyes narrowed. About the precedent it sets. About what it means for the established order. Your rise from common seamstress to queen in a matter of weeks undermines generations of tradition. Tradition that says only certain bloodlines deserve power, Rhea said calmly. Yes, I understand how that would be distressing to families who've relied on that tradition to maintain their status. The room went very quiet. Lord Farron's face flushed. You're suggesting we haven't earned our positions? I'm suggesting that accident of birth isn't the same as merit, but please continue. What are your specific concerns about my coronation? Another noble, a thin man with sharp features, leaned forward. Our concern is that you have no training for this role, no understanding of governance, diplomacy, military strategy. You've been, what, a few weeks at court? And now you expect to be queen? I don't expect anything, Rhea replied. His Majesty has chosen to crown me queen. What I expect is to work harder than anyone in this room to prove I deserve that crown. What I expect is to spend every day learning what I don't know and applying what I do. What I expect is to be judged on my actions, not my ancestry. Pretty words, Lady Ashton said, but you're asking us to bet the kingdom's future on your potential. Kaelin's hut found Rhea's under the table, a brief squeeze of support, but she didn't need him to answer for her. No, she said. I'm asking you to bet on the fact that merit matters more than bloodlines. That intelligence matters more than titles. That courage and determination matter more than whether your great-grandfather owned the right piece of land. She looked at each of them in turn. If that's a bet you're unwilling to make, then you're exactly the kind of thinking this kingdom needs to move beyond. The silence that followed was electric. Several nobles looked genuinely shocked that she'd spoken so directly. Others seemed almost impressed. Then Lord Farron stood abruptly. This is intolerable. We came here in good faith to express legitimate concerns, and you respond with insults? I've insulted no one, Rhea said calmly. I've simply stated facts. If those facts make you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why. Your Majesty, Farron addressed Kaelin directly. I must ask, are you going to allow your wife to speak to the nobility this way? I'm going to allow my queen to speak however she sees fit, Kaelin replied. Just as I'm going to allow the nobility to reveal exactly how fragile their confidence is when challenged by someone they consider beneath them. Farron's jaw worked. This coronation is a mistake. The Western provinces will not support it. Then the Western provinces will find themselves with reduced trade access, limited military protection, and significantly less influence at court, Kaelin said pleasantly. Your choice. You're threatening us. I'm explaining consequences. You came here to intimidate my wife into backing down. Instead, you've shown me exactly which nobles need to be reminded who holds actual power in this kingdom. He stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The coronation will proceed as scheduled. You're all invited to attend. What you do with that invitation will tell me everything I need to know about where your loyalties lie. One by one, the nobles stood and filed out, their expressions ranging from fury to fear. Only Lady Ashton paused at the door, looking back at Rhea with something that might have been grudging respect. "You're either very brave or very foolish," she said quietly. "Maybe both," Rhea replied, "but I'm here regardless." Lady Ashton nodded once, then left. When the door closed behind the last noble, Rhea let out a breath she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. "That," Kaelin said, "was magnificent." "That was terrifying." "It was both. But you didn't back down. You didn't apologize. You made them look small instead of making yourself seem desperate." He pulled her to her feet, his hands on her shoulders. "Half of them will refuse to attend the coronation now. The other half will come specifically to see if you'll fail." "And which half matters more?" "Neither. What matters is that you just declared war on the old guard, and you did it without flinching." His eyes were intense. "But Rhea, you need to understand, this is just the beginning. When you put on that crown, they'll come at you with everything they have, every mistake you make, every moment of weakness, they'll exploit it." "I know." "Do you? Because there's still time to walk away, to end this before it gets worse." Rhea thought about Isolde's letter, about Lord Brennan's contempt, about all those nobles who thought she didn't belong, about Victor, who'd assumed she'd be broken by his rejection. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not walking away. I'm going to stand in that coronation hall and let them put a crown on my head and dare any one of them to say I don't deserve it." Kaelin smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Then let's make sure you're ready." The next 2 weeks were a blur of final preparations. Seamstresses created a coronation gown that was equal parts armor and art. Mira drilled Rhea on the ceremony protocols until she could recite them in her sleep. Kaelin walked her through the political landscape one more time, identifying allies and enemies, preparing for every possible disruption. And through it all, Rhea felt the weight of what was coming settling on her shoulders like that crown she'd soon wear. The night before the coronation, she stood at her window looking out over the mountains, unable to sleep. A knock at her door made her turn. Kaelin entered without waiting for permission, carrying 2 glasses of wine. He handed her one. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much thinking." "About tomorrow?" "About everything." She sipped the wine. "A month ago, I was a seamstress in a small town, engaged to a man who didn't value me. Now I'm about to be crowned queen of the largest kingdom in the realm. It doesn't feel real." "It's real, and tomorrow it becomes permanent." He studied her in the moonlight. "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He moved to stand beside her at the window. "You're going to make a remarkable queen, Rhea." "You don't know that." "I do. I've watched you these past weeks. The way you learn, the way you fight, the way you refuse to be diminished by people who should be beneath your notice." He paused. "You're stronger than you think." "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm one mistake away from everything falling apart." "Everyone feels that way. The difference is whether you let that fear paralyze you or drive you forward." His hand found hers, warm and solid. "Tomorrow, every noble in the kingdom will watch you become queen. Some will hope you fail. Some will actively try to make you fail. But you're going to walk into that hall and claim that crown and show them all exactly who you are." Rhea turned to look at him. This man who'd agreed to her desperate plan and turned it into something neither of them had expected. "And who am I?" "The woman who walked into my throne room with nothing and demanded everything. The woman who faced down her ex-fiancé and made him look small. The woman who stood up to my council and the Western nobles and refused to be intimidated." His eyes were intense in the moonlight. "You're the woman I chose to stand beside me, and tomorrow you become the queen this kingdom needs." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Rhea couldn't quite name. They were standing close enough that she could feel the heat of him, could see the pulse at his throat, could imagine closing the distance, and a bell tolled in the distance, marking midnight. The coronation day had officially begun. Kaelin stepped back, breaking the spell. "You should try to rest. Tomorrow will be long." "Kaelin." "Yes?" She wanted to say so many things. "Thank you. I'm scared. I don't want to do this alone. I'm not sure when this stopped being an act." Instead, she just said,
Don't let me fall tomorrow. His expression softened. Never. Then he was gone, and Rhea was alone with the wine and the moonlight and the terrifying certainty that tomorrow would change everything. She didn't sleep. Instead, she stood at the window watching the sky lighten from black to gray to the pale blue of dawn. Somewhere in the keep, servants were preparing the coronation hall. Nobles were arriving from across the kingdom. History was being written, and Rhea was about to become part of it. Whether as a footnote or a legend remained to be seen. When Mira arrived at sunrise to begin preparations, Rhea was ready. The seamstresses dressed her in the coronation gown, white silk with gold threading that caught the light like captured sunlight. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that took 3 women an hour to complete. Jewelry was added piece by piece until she glittered like something forged rather than born. In the mirror, Rhea barely recognized herself. "You look like a queen," Mira said quietly. "I look terrified." Queens are allowed to be terrified. They're just not allowed to show it. Mira met her eyes in the mirror. "Whatever happens today, remember, you earned this. Not through birth, or marriage, or manipulation. Through courage and intelligence, and sheer refusal to accept the limitations other people tried to place on you." Rhea nodded, not trusting her voice. The coronation hall was vast, packed with nobles in their finest clothing. Every major family in the kingdom had sent representatives. Rhea could see the Western nobles clustered together, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. She spotted Lady Ashton, Lord Farron, even a glimpse of Isolde in the crowd. And there, near the back, Victor. He'd come. Of course he'd come. He wouldn't miss this. Kaelin stood at the front of the hall in formal regalia, looking every inch the Alpha King. When Rhea entered, escorted by Mira, the entire crowd turned to watch. The walk down that aisle felt like walking through fire. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. She could feel the judgment pressing down on her from all sides, could hear the whispers that started the moment she appeared. But she kept walking. Head high, shoulders back, eyes forward. When she reached the front of the hall and knelt before Kaelin, the crowd fell silent. The ceremony proceeded according to ancient ritual. Vows were spoken, blessings were offered. And then Kaelin lifted the crown, delicate silver worked into patterns of wolves and mountains, and held it above Rhea's head. "By the power vested in me as Alpha King of the North," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "I crown you Rhea Varkas, Queen of the Northern Dominion. May you rule with wisdom, courage, and strength." The crown settled onto her head. The weight of it was shocking, heavier than she'd expected, pressing down on her skull like a physical burden. Rhea stood, and Kaelin took her hand, presenting her to the crowd. "Your queen," he announced. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd simply stared, uncertainty written across hundreds of faces. This was the moment of truth. Would they accept her or reject her? Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, someone began to applaud. Then another, then more, until the hall filled with the sound, reluctant at first but growing stronger. Not everyone joined in. Rhea could see clusters of nobles who remained silent, their expressions cold. The Western delegation stood like statues, refusing to acknowledge her. But enough people were applauding that it counted. Enough people were bending their knees, offering respect if not genuine acceptance. Rhea had become queen. The reception afterward was a gauntlet of conversations, each one a test. Nobles approached to offer congratulations that ranged from genuine to poisonously false. Rhea handled each with the grace Mira had taught her, never letting her smile slip, never showing weakness. She was talking to a minor lord about agricultural policies when a commotion erupted near the entrance. Voices raised in anger, the crowd parting. Victor pushed through, his face flushed with wine and rage. Isolde trailed behind him, trying to catch his arm, whispering urgently. He ignored her and headed straight for Rhea. Kaelin moved to intercept, but Rhea caught his arm. "Let him come!" Victor stopped in front of her, swaying slightly. Up close, she could smell the alcohol on him, could see the redness in his eyes. "You," he said, his voice too loud in the suddenly quiet hall. "You think you've won. You think you've proven something." "Victor, don't!" Isolde hissed. "She needs to hear this." He turned back to Rhea, his expression ugly. "You're wearing a crown, but you're still nothing.
Still the same worthless seamstress I threw away. The only difference is now you've fooled a king into thinking you're worth something." The crowd gasped. Several nobles looked scandalized, not at what Victor was saying, but at him saying it so publicly. Rhea felt Kaelin tense beside her, felt the rage rolling off him in waves, but she kept her voice calm. "Are you finished?" "No, I'm not finished. You don't belong here. You never did. And when he finally sees what you really are, common, ignorant, worthless, you'll have nowhere to go, no one to protect you. You'll have nothing." "I have a crown," Rhea said quietly. "I have a kingdom. I have a husband who chose me not because of my bloodline or my connections, but because of who I am." She stepped closer, keeping her voice low so only Victor and those immediately nearby could hear. "And what do you have, Victor? A wife who looks at you with disappointment, a marriage built on politics instead of love, and the knowledge that you threw away someone who could have been extraordinary because you were too small to see her value." Victor's face went from red to white. His hand rose, and for a moment Rhea thought he might actually strike her. But Kaelin's hand closed around Victor's wrist before he could complete the movement. "Touch her," the king said quietly, "and you'll lose more than your hand." The threat in his voice was absolute. Victor jerked his arm free, stumbling back. He looked around wildly, seeming to realize for the first time that he'd made a scene in front of the entire court. "Get him out," Kaelin ordered. 2 guards appeared and took Victor by the arms, escorting him forcibly toward the exit. Isolde followed, her face burning with humiliation. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Then slowly conversations resumed, the whispers now focused entirely on Victor's outburst rather than Rhea's worthiness. Rhea realized she was shaking. Kaelin's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. "You handled that perfectly," he murmured. "I wanted to hit him." "I know, but this was better. You let him destroy himself in front of everyone who matters." He was right. Victor had just confirmed every doubt anyone might have had about his judgment, while Rhea had remained calm and dignified. It was a better revenge than anything she could have planned. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. More conversations, more political maneuvering, more nobles trying to figure out where they stood in this new order. Rhea's face hurt from smiling, her head ached from the crown's weight, her body screamed for rest. But she endured, because that's what queens did. It was nearly midnight when the last guests finally departed. Rhea stood in the now empty coronation hall, the crown still on her head, exhaustion washing over her in waves. Kaelin appeared at her side. "You can take it off now." "Not yet." She looked around the empty hall. "I need to feel it a little longer. Need to remember what it cost." "What did it cost?" "Everything I was, everyone I thought I'd be." She touched the crown lightly. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe you have to lose one version of yourself to become another. And are you happy with the version you've become?" Rhea thought about the woman she'd been a month ago. Small, scared, willing to accept whatever scraps of worth others assigned her. She thought about the woman she was now, crowned, powerful, terrifying and terrified in equal measure. "Ask me again in a year," she said, "when I've actually had to be queen for a while. When the novelty wears off and it's just work and politics and endless decisions that affect thousands of lives." "Fair enough." He paused. "There's something you should know. Lord Brennan and 3 other councillors submitted their resignations tonight. They're refusing to serve under you." Rhea's heart sank. "So we've lost a third of the council. So we've lost the council members who would have fought every decision you made, and now we get to replace them with people who actually value merit over bloodlines." He smiled slightly. "Sometimes losing the wrong people is the same as winning." "That's optimistic. That's political." He held out his hand. "Come on. You've been queen for 14 hours. You've earned some rest." Rhea let him lead her from the hall, the crown still on her head, feeling heavier with every step. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and still be queen. And the day after that. And every day after for the rest of her life. She'd gotten exactly what she'd fought for. The question was whether she'd survive it. They reached her chambers. Kaelin paused at the door, something unreadable in his expression. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I meant what I said in the ceremony, about wisdom and courage and strength. You have all of those, Rhea, more than most people who've been born to this. I hope you're right. I am. He stepped closer, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her, but instead he just reached up and carefully lifted the crown from her head, cradling the delicate silver like it was made of glass. This is just metal and jewels. It doesn't make you queen. You do that yourself. Then he was gone, taking the crown with him, leaving Rhea alone with her reflection and the sudden, overwhelming realization that nothing would ever be simple again. She'd won. But winning, she was beginning to understand, was just the beginning of a much longer, much more dangerous game. And somewhere out there, in the shadows beyond the keep's walls, enemies were already planning their next move. The first crisis came 3 days after the coronation. Rhea was in the council chamber reviewing trade agreements when a messenger burst through the doors, his face pale and his clothes streaked with mud from hard riding. He dropped to one knee in front of Kaelin, gasping for breath. Your Majesty, the Western provinces, they've closed their borders. The room went silent. Kaelin's expression didn't change, but Rhea felt him go very still beside her. Explain, he said quietly. Lord Farron and 5 other Western houses have declared the coronation illegitimate. They're refusing to recognize Queen Rhea's authority and have blocked all trade routes from their territories into the northern provinces. The messenger swallowed hard. They're calling it a peaceful protest, but they've stationed armed men at every crossing. The remaining councillors erupted into urgent conversation. Rhea's mind raced, calculating. The western provinces controlled most of the kingdom's agricultural production in 3 major trade ports. If they truly closed their borders, it would strangle the northern territories within weeks. This was exactly what Kaelin had warned about. The old guard wasn't just resisting, they were staging a coordinated rebellion. How many men? Kaelin asked. At least 3,000 across all the checkpoints, maybe more. One of the councillors, Lord Garrett, one of the newer appointments, leaned forward. Your Majesty, we need to respond with force. Send the northern armies south, break the blockade before it solidifies. And start a civil war over trade routes? Another councillor countered. That's exactly what they want. It makes you look like a tyrant suppressing legitimate dissent. It's not dissent, it's treason. Enough! Kaelin's voice cut through the argument. He turned to Rhea. Your queen, what do you suggest? Every eye in the room swiveled to her. Rhea felt the weight of their scrutiny, their skepticism, their certainty that she'd have no answer. This was the test. The moment where she either proved she belonged at this table or confirmed every doubt they'd ever had about her. She thought about the western provinces, about the nobles she'd met at the reception, about Lord Farron's fury and Lady Ashton's grudging respect, and Isolde's letter offering her an exit, about the fact that blockades only worked if people were willing to maintain them. We don't break the blockade, she said slowly, working through the strategy as she spoke. We make it irrelevant. Kaelin's eyes sharpened with interest. How? The western provinces are blocking northern trade routes, but they're not blocking each other's trade. She stood, moving to the large map mounted on the wall. What if we bypass them entirely? The eastern territories have ports too, smaller, less developed, but functional. We redirect our maritime trade there. For overland goods, we route through the mountain passes into the southern kingdoms and come back around. That would take months to establish, Lord Garrett protested, and cost a fortune in new infrastructure. It would take 6 weeks if we prioritize it, and yes, it'll cost money, but less than a war would cost, less than the western provinces think we're willing to spend. Rhea traced the alternate routes on the map. They're betting we'll either surrender or attack. We do neither. We build around them. And what happens to them when their ports are sitting empty and their crops are rotting because no one's buying? Another councillor asked. Exactly. Rhea turned to face the table. They're using their economic power as a weapon. We demonstrate that we don't need their economic power. Within 2 months, their own people will be demanding they reopen the borders because the blockade is hurting them more than it's hurting us. The council was silent for a long moment. Then Kaelin smiled, that sharp, predatory expression that meant he saw the same angles she did. It's risky, he said. If the eastern ports can't handle the increased traffic, if the mountain routes prove impassable, if the southern kingdoms refuse to cooperate, then we adapt, Rhea interrupted. But right now, the western nobles think I'm weak because I'm new. They think you're compromised because you married beneath your station. They think we'll either cave to their demands or make them martyrs by attacking them. She met his gaze. Let's prove them wrong on all counts. Kaelin looked around the table. Objections? Silence. Some of the counselors looked impressed. Others looked skeptical but unable to articulate why. None of them could deny the logic. Then we proceed with the Queen's plan, Kaelin said. Lord Garrett, you'll oversee the Eastern Port expansion. Lord Marcus, coordinate with the Southern Kingdoms about the mountain routes. I want preliminary agreements in place within 2 weeks. As the counselors dispersed to their tasks, Kaelin caught Rhea's arm. That was brilliant. That was desperate improvisation. Same thing, usually. He lowered his voice. But you need to understand, if this doesn't work, if we can't establish those alternate routes fast enough, we'll have no choice but to use military force. And every casualty in that conflict will be laid at your feet by people looking for reasons to undermine you. I know. Rhea's stomach twisted. But I also know that attacking them immediately would do the same thing. At least this way, we're trying something else first. The next 6 weeks were brutal. Rhea threw herself into the logistics of rerouting the kingdom's trade networks. She spent hours each day with merchants and port officials and engineers, learning the intricacies of cargo manifests and shipping schedules and infrastructure requirements. She traveled to the Eastern Territories personally, inspecting ports, negotiating with local leaders, promising royal support for expansion projects. It was exhausting, technical work that had nothing to do with the romantic vision of queenship she'd once imagined. No grand balls or elegant dinners, just endless meetings about dock capacity and road maintenance and tariff structures. But it was working. The eastern ports began handling increased traffic. The southern kingdoms, intrigued by the promise of new trade partnerships, agreed to facilitate mountain crossings. Merchants who'd initially been skeptical started seeing the advantages of the new routes. Less competition, better terms, opportunities they'd never had access to before. And in the western provinces, as Rhea had predicted, the blockade began to hurt. Reports trickled in through Kaelin's network of informants. Farmers in the western territories were watching their grain stores fill up with nowhere to sell them. Port cities were seeing unemployment rise as shipping traffic dried up. Local merchants were losing money while their counterparts in the east suddenly flourished. 3 weeks into the blockade, the first cracks appeared. A minor western lord sent a secret message requesting permission to reopen his section of the border. 2 days later, another joined him. Then another. Lord Farron held firm, threatening any noble who broke ranks. But the economic pressure was mounting, and even he couldn't ignore it forever. Meanwhile, Rhea's hands-on approach to solving the crisis was having an unexpected effect. The nobles and merchants she worked with directly began to see her not as an upstart seamstress playing at queen, but as someone who actually understood their problems and was willing to fight for solutions. You've surprised them, Mira observed one evening as she helped Rhea prepare for yet another dinner with Eastern trade representatives. They expected you to be decorative. Instead, you're in the ports arguing about cargo capacity like you've been doing this for years. I'm making it up as I go, Rhea admitted. Everyone is. You're just honest enough to admit it. Mira adjusted the clasp on Rhea's necklace. The whispers are changing, you know. 2 months ago, the court was calling you the seamstress queen, and not in a complimentary way. Now they're calling you the builder queen, the one who's reshaping the kingdom's economy because a handful of stubborn Western lords thought they could starve us into submission. Rhea caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes, and she'd lost weight from the stress. But there was something else there too, a hardness that hadn't been there before. A certainty. Do you think it's enough, she asked quietly, to make them accept me? Some of them will never accept you no matter what you accomplish. But the ones who matter, the ones who care more about competence than bloodlines, they're already starting to see what the king saw when he chose you. The breaking point came 6 weeks after the blockade began. Rhea was in a council meeting when the messenger arrived, this time with better news. The southern kingdoms had officially ratified the new trade agreements. The mountain routes were now viable year-round, with the first caravans already making successful crossings. The eastern ports had doubled their capacity and were handling the increased traffic smoothly. The northern territories didn't need the western provinces anymore. and the western provinces were beginning to realize it. "How long before they break?" Lord Garrett asked. "Days," Kaelin said. "A week at most. They can't sustain this much longer without serious internal unrest." He was right. 4 days later, a delegation from the western provinces requested an audience. Not Lord Farron. He was too proud to come personally, but 3 of his most powerful allies, including Lady Ashton. They were shown into the throne room where Rhea sat beside Kaelin, both of them in formal regalia. The symbolism was deliberate. This wasn't a private negotiation. This was an official audience where the Western nobles would acknowledge the queen they'd tried to undermine. Lady Ashton stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Majesties, we come on behalf of the Western Provincial Alliance to discuss terms for reopening our borders." "Terms," Rhea repeated calmly. "You closed your borders to protest my coronation, claiming it was illegitimate. Now you want to negotiate terms?" "The coronation was controversial," Lady Ashton said carefully. "But we recognize that the current situation benefits no one. Our people are suffering. Yours are finding alternate routes. Perhaps we were hasty in our response." "Perhaps," Rhea leaned forward slightly. "Or perhaps you gambled that we'd be dependent enough on your provinces that we'd have no choice but to meet your demands. And now that gamble has failed, you're trying to save face by calling it a negotiation." One of the other nobles, Lord Sterling, bristled. "Your Majesty, we came here in good faith. Good faith would have been attending my coronation and offering support instead of immediately staging an economic rebellion." Rhea kept her voice level. "Good faith would have been bringing your concerns directly to us instead of trying to starve the Northern Territories into submission. Don't talk to me about good faith when you've shown none." The room was silent. Lady Ashton's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been respect. "What are your terms?" she asked bluntly. Kaelin started to speak, but Rhea touched his arm lightly. This was her fight, her terms. "The borders reopen immediately," she said. "All of them, no conditions, no gradual rollback. Your people resume normal trade with the Northern Territories as if the blockade never happened. And in exchange? In exchange, we don't permanently redirect all our trade through the new eastern and southern routes we've just spent 6 weeks establishing." Rhea let that sink in. "We maintain those routes as alternatives, of course. Redundancy is good policy, but we won't actively encourage merchants to bypass your provinces. Your ports can resume normal operations." Lord Sterling leaned forward. "That's it? You're not demanding reparations? Not punishing the families who led the blockade?" "I'm not interested in punishment," Rhea said. "I'm interested in a kingdom that functions. You staged your protest. It failed. Now we all move forward, and you live with the knowledge that the next time you try to undermine my authority, I'll have even more options to work around you." It was a power move disguised as generosity. She wasn't punishing them because she didn't need to. She'd already proven they couldn't hurt her. The humiliation of that was worse than any fine or sanction. Lady Ashton understood immediately. Rhea could see it in the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her posture shifted just slightly. "Those are acceptable terms, Your Majesty. We'll return to our provinces and coordinate the reopening." "One more thing," Rhea added. "Lord Farron personally will come to the capital within the month, not to negotiate, to acknowledge the coronation he claimed was illegitimate. If he refuses, his family's trade licenses will be reviewed for compliance with kingdom regulations. I'm sure we'll find something that needs correcting." The threat was clear. Come bend the knee or face endless bureaucratic harassment. Lady Ashton bowed. "I'll convey the message, Your Majesty." After they left, Kaelin turned to Rhea with something like awe in his expression. "You just forced them to surrender while making it look like you were being generous. That was masterful. That was necessary." Rhea stood, suddenly exhausted. "They needed to understand that I'm not going anywhere, and trying to force me out will only hurt them. They understand now. But Rhea, Lord Farron won't come willingly. You've just publicly humiliated him." "Good. Let him refuse. Then we'll have justification for going after his trade empire, and every other Western noble will see what happens to people who choose pride over pragmatism." She sounded cold, even to her own ears. Strategic, ruthless. When had she become someone who could calculate political consequences like this? The answer was simple: the moment she'd put on that crown. The western borders reopened 3 days later, just as Lady Ashton had promised. Trade resumed. The crisis passed, and the whispers in court shifted again, this time with a note of genuine respect mixed with the skepticism. The seamstress who'd married a king had just outmaneuvered 6 of the most powerful noble families in the kingdom without drawing a single sword. But the victory came with a price Rhea hadn't anticipated. She was working late in her study 2 nights after the Western delegation's departure when Kalen entered, his expression troubled. He closed the door behind him with more force than necessary. "We need to talk," he said. Rhea set down her pen. "What's wrong?" This." He gestured vaguely. "The way you've been working yourself to death for the past 6 weeks. The way you handled the Western nobles like you've been playing political games your entire life. The way you're becoming exactly what they need you to be. Isn't that what you wanted? A queen who could actually rule?" "I wanted a partner. Someone who understood that power isn't just about winning every fight." He moved closer, his voice tight. "You're brilliant, Rhea. What you did with the trade routes, with the Western provinces, it was exactly the right move. But I'm watching you turn into something harder, colder, and I'm not sure you've noticed." The words hit like a slap. Rhea stood, anger flaring. "What did you expect? You warned me they'd come after me. You told me I'd have to be stronger than all of them. Now I'm being strong, and you're criticizing me for it?" "There's a difference between strength and armor so thick you can't feel anything anymore." "I feel plenty. I just don't have the luxury of showing it." Her voice rose. "Every day I'm surrounded by people waiting for me to fail. Every decision I make is scrutinized for weakness. Every emotion I show is used against me. So yes, I've learned to be harder, to calculate, to treat politics like the survival game it is, because that's what works." "At what cost?" "At whatever cost it takes to keep this crown on my head and this kingdom functioning." She was breathing hard now, months of stress and pressure pouring out. "You asked me to be queen. You put me in a position where failure means becoming a footnote in history as the common woman who thought she could rule and proved everyone right about her limitations. So don't stand there now and criticize me for doing whatever it takes to succeed." Kalen was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not criticizing you for being strong. I'm worried because I haven't heard you laugh in 6 weeks. I haven't seen you relax or let your guard down or show any sign that you're still the woman who walked into my throne room and demanded I marry her because she had nothing left to lose. That woman doesn't exist anymore. She can't, not, and survive this." "Then what happens when you've won? When you've beaten every enemy and secured every alliance and proven to everyone that you deserve this crown? What's left if you've turned yourself into something you don't recognize?" Rhea wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was fine, that this was just what leadership looked like. But standing there in her study surrounded by documents about trade routes and political alliances, wearing a gown that cost more than she used to make in a year, she couldn't. Because he was right. She'd been so focused on proving she could be queen that she'd stopped asking herself if she wanted to be this version of queen. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I don't know what's left. I just know I can't afford to think about it right now." Kalen crossed the space between them, his hand settling on her shoulders. "Yes, you can. You have to. Because if you lose yourself completely trying to be what they need, then what's the point of having won?" Before Rhea could respond, there was an urgent knock at the door. A servant's voice called through the wood. "Your Majesties, forgive the interruption, but there's a situation in the courtyard. It's Lord Farron." Rhea and Kalen exchanged glances. "He came," Kalen said. They descended to the courtyard together to find Lord Farron standing beside a travel-worn carriage, flanked by a small guard contingent. He looked older than he had at the coronation, grayer, more weathered, his expensive clothes unable to disguise the defeat in his posture. The courtyard had filled with curious onlookers, courtiers drawn by the commotion, servants pausing in their tasks. Everyone wanted to see this, the proud Western lord who'd led the blockade brought low. Rhea steeled herself, preparing for another confrontation, but when Farron saw them approach, he simply dropped to one knee. "Your Majesties," he said,
his voice carrying across the courtyard. "I come to acknowledge my error. The blockade was misguided. Your coronation was legitimate and binding. I recognize Rhea Varkas as Queen of the Northern Dominion and pledge my house's loyalty to the crown."
The words were clearly practiced, probably reviewed by a dozen advisors looking for ways to preserve some dignity. But they were still a surrender, complete and public. Rhea could have savored it, could have let him kneel there longer, could have made a speech about the consequences of rebellion, could have ground his face in the humiliation of this moment. Instead, she thought about what Kaelin had just said upstairs, about the cost of becoming something harder and colder. "Rise, Lord Farron," she said. He looked up, surprised. Slowly, he stood. "Your protest was driven by concern for the kingdom's traditions," Rhea continued, choosing her words carefully. "I don't agree with your methods, but I can understand the motivation. You believed I wasn't qualified to rule." She paused. "Did the past 6 weeks change your mind?" It was a dangerous question. It gave him an opening to be diplomatic without being genuine. But Rhea found she wanted the truth more than she wanted victory. Lord Farron studied her for a long moment. "I believed you were an opportunist who'd seduced the king for power. I believed you'd crumble under the pressure of real governance." He drew a breath. "I was wrong. What you did with the trade routes, the speed of it, the strategic thinking, the willingness to invest in long-term solutions instead of quick military victories. That wasn't opportunism. That was leadership." The courtyard was silent. Even the servants had stopped pretending to work. "I still think this kingdom would be better served by traditional alliances," Farron continued. "I still believe in the value of bloodlines and established power structures. But I'm forced to acknowledge that you've proven more competent in 2 months than many born to this role show in years." He met her gaze. "So, yes, Your Majesty, you've changed my mind, not completely, but enough." It was honest. Grudging and limited, but honest. And somehow that meant more than enthusiastic lies would have. "Then we can work together," Rhea said. "I'm not asking you to abandon your beliefs or pretend you think I'm perfect. I'm asking you to judge me on my actions instead of my origins. Can you do that?" "I can try." "That's all any of us can do." She gestured to the keep. "You've traveled far. Please accept our hospitality for the night. We can discuss the Western Province's concerns in the morning when you're rested." Farron looked startled by the offer. He'd probably expected to deliver his acknowledgement and be dismissed immediately. Instead, she was treating him like a legitimate political partner. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I accept." As servants led him inside, Kaelin leaned close to Rhea. "That was unexpected. Was it a mistake?" "No. It was smart. You gave him a path to genuine cooperation instead of just forced compliance. Some of the council won't like it. They'll say you went too easy on him." "Let them say it." Rhea watched Farron disappear into the keep. "I'm tired of winning through intimidation and power plays. If I'm going to be queen for the rest of my life, I want to build something better than a kingdom held together by fear." Kaelin's expression softened. "There she is." "Who?" "The woman who walked into my throne room." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring she still wore. "The one who wanted to change things instead of just existing around them." The meeting with Farron the next morning was surprisingly productive. He brought legitimate concerns about trade imbalances and agricultural subsidies that Rhea hadn't fully considered. They spent 3 hours negotiating solutions that addressed the Western Province's needs without compromising the Northern Territory's interests. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still disagreements about fundamental approaches to governance. But it was dialogue instead of deadlock, progress instead of posturing. When Farron left later that day, he paused before entering his carriage. "Your Majesty, a word of advice?" Rhea nodded. "Don't lose the part of you that made you different from us. That willingness to see past tradition to what actually works, that's valuable. But remember that you'll need allies, not just victories. Sometimes making room for people who disagree with you is more powerful than proving them wrong." He bowed once more, then departed, leaving Rhea standing in the courtyard, processing what might have been the most useful political advice she'd received since becoming queen. The weeks that followed brought a shift in the court's atmosphere. Not acceptance, not yet, maybe never completely, but something closer to working cooperation. Nobles who'd been openly hostile became grudgingly professional. Council meetings became less about resisting her and more about actually debating policy. The breakthrough came during a session about military reorganization. One of the older councillors, Lord Haverton, who'd been skeptical of Rhea from the start, proposed a strategy for reinforcing the southern borders. Rhea listened, then suggested a modification that would reduce costs while improving coverage. There was the usual pause while the council waited for Haverton to dismiss her idea. Instead, he studied the maps for a long moment, then nodded. "That's better than my original plan," he said simply. "We should implement the Queen's modification." The casual way he said it, the Queen's modification, not Lady Rhea's idea, or this suggestion, marked a subtle but profound shift. He'd acknowledged her authority without caveat or qualification. Other councillors followed suit. Within the hour, they were debating the merits of Rhea's proposal versus Haverton's original, treating both as equally valid strategic options. Not because she was queen and they had to, but because her idea had merit. After the meeting, Mira caught Rhea in the corridor. "Did you notice?" "Notice what?" "Lord Haverton called you queen. Not as a title he had to use, but as a fact he accepted." Mira smiled. "That's the real victory. Not forcing compliance, earning recognition." That evening, Rhea found Kaelin in his study, reviewing reports. She settled into the chair across from him. "Lord Haverton acknowledged one of my strategic proposals today." Kaelin looked up, understanding immediately why that mattered. "How does it feel?" "Strange. Good strange. Like I finally stopped fighting just to stand in place and can actually start moving forward." She paused. "You were right, about the cost of becoming too hard. I'm sorry for pushing you on that. You were doing what you had to do." "No, I needed to hear it. I was so focused on proving I could survive this that I forgot to think about what kind of queen I wanted to be." She met his gaze. "I want to be someone who changes things for the better, not someone who just wins political battles. Those aren't mutually exclusive. I know, but they require balance, strength and flexibility, power and compassion." She smiled slightly. "Apparently being queen is complicated." "Apparently." He set down his papers. "For what it's worth, I think you're finding that balance. The way you handled Farron, giving him room to cooperate instead of just forcing surrender, that was the right call. It's already paying dividends in the western provinces." "Is that your way of saying I'm doing a good job?" "That's my way of saying you're becoming exactly the queen I hoped you would be. Strong enough to face down enemies. Wise enough to turn enemies into allies when possible." He stood, moving around the desk. "And still brave enough to question yourself instead of just assuming you're always right." He was close now, close enough that Rhea could feel the warmth of him, could see the way he was looking at her. Not like a political ally or a strategic asset, but like something else entirely. "This was supposed to be temporary," she said quietly. "A performance. 9 days, then an annulment." "I know." "When did it stop being a performance?" "For me?" Kaelin's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Probably somewhere around day 3, when you argued with me about whether spite was a valid political motivation." "For you?" Rhea thought about it. About the moment when this stopped being about revenge on Victor and started being about something real. "The dancing lesson. When you asked if I could look at you like you were the only person in the room, I realized I didn't have to pretend." His eyes darkened. "Rhea." Whatever he was about to say was interrupted by another knock. This time, it was a messenger with news from the southern kingdoms. Trade agreements were yielding better results than projected. Requests for expanded partnerships. Opportunities for alliances. The kingdom was thriving. The Western blockade hadn't just failed, it had catalyzed changes that were making the entire realm stronger. After the messenger left, Kaelin turned back to Rhea. "Where were we?" "You were about to say something before we were interrupted. I was about to say that this marriage stopped being temporary for me the moment you chose to stay. The moment you decided you wanted to be queen, not because you had to, but because you believed you could make a difference." He stepped closer again. "And I'm hoping you feel the same way." "I do." Rhea's heart was hammering. "But Kaelin, what happens now? We've been so focused on survival and politics and proving ourselves that we haven't talked about what this actually is, what we are." I know what I want us to be, which is partners. In every sense. Not just politically, but genuinely. A real marriage, not a strategic alliance. His voice dropped. Unless that's not what you want. Rhea thought about the past 3 months, about how they'd faced every crisis side by side, about the way he challenged her when she needed it and supported her when she faltered, about the way her chest tightened every time he walked into a room. It's what I want, she said. It's what I've wanted for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it. Why? Because wanting something real makes it hurt more if you lose it. Kaylin's expression softened. Then I guess we'll just have to make sure we don't lose it. He kissed her then. Not the practiced, performative gestures they'd exchanged in public, but something real and deep and filled with months of carefully controlled wanting. Rhea's hands found his shoulders, pulling him closer, letting herself feel all the things she'd been too afraid or too busy to acknowledge. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kaylin rested his forehead against hers. So, he said, Queen Rhea, partner, wife. How does it feel? Rhea thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, broken and discarded, with nothing left to lose. She thought about the crown that still felt too heavy some days, about the council meetings and trade negotiations and endless responsibilities, about the man holding her now, who'd taken a desperate gamble on a seamstress with nothing but courage and helped her become something extraordinary. Terrifying, she admitted, and perfect. 3 months after her coronation, Queen Rhea Varkas stood in the council chamber and presented a comprehensive proposal for reforming the kingdom's agricultural subsidies. The council debated it seriously, amended it thoughtfully, and approved it with genuine enthusiasm. No one questioned her authority. No one suggested she didn't belong there. She'd earned this, not through birth or luck or manipulation, but through relentless work and strategic brilliance and the refusal to let anyone else define her worth. That evening, as she and Kaylin walked through the keep's gardens under a sky full of stars, Rhea allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. You're smiling, Kaylin observed. I am. May I ask why? Because I just realized something. I spent so long fighting to prove I deserved to be here that I forgot to notice when I'd actually won. She looked up at him. They're not fighting me anymore. We're governing together. You noticed that, did you? Hard to miss when Lord Haverton spent 20 minutes today arguing in favor of one of my proposals against opposition from other councillors. He was defending my idea because he thought it was good policy, not because I'm queen. That's what you wanted, isn't it? To be judged on merit instead of titles? Yes, it's exactly what I wanted. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Thank you. For what? For taking a chance on a desperate woman who stormed into your throne room with nothing but audacity, for helping me become someone who could actually do this, for being exactly the partner I needed. She reached up, her hand cupping his face. For choosing me. For real. Kaylin pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. Best decision I ever made. Standing there in the garden, wearing the crown she'd fought so hard for, held by the man who'd helped her claim it, Rhea Varkas, the seamstress who became a queen, finally felt like she'd found her place. The road ahead would still be difficult. There would be more crises, more challenges, more nobles who'd never fully accept her. But she'd proven she could handle it. She'd turned enemies into reluctant allies, solved problems others thought impossible, and reshaped a kingdom that had tried to reject her. She'd won. Not just against Victor or the Western nobles or the skeptical council, she'd won against every limitation anyone had ever tried to place on her. And this victory, this hard-earned, terrifying, perfect victory, was only the beginning. 6 months after her coronation, Rhea woke to the sound of rain against the keep's windows and the warmth of Kaylin beside her. For a moment she lay still, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the impossible reality of this life she'd built. The seamstress who'd had nothing now had everything. But the kingdom she'd fought so hard to earn was about to face its greatest test yet. The crisis arrived with the morning dispatches. Rhea was reviewing agricultural reports when a messenger burst into the council chamber, his face ashen. Your Majesties, there's been an incident at the southern border. The Valdris Empire has mobilized troops along our frontier. They're demanding an audience with the king. The council erupted into urgent conversation.
The Valdris Empire, a massive military power to the south, had been a distant concern, separated from the Northern Dominion by mountains and treaties that had held for 3 generations. If they were mobilizing now, it meant something fundamental had changed. Kaelin's expression went cold and calculating. How many troops? Initial reports suggest 20,000, maybe more. What are their demands? Rhea asked. The messenger hesitated. They want to discuss the legitimacy of the Northern Dominion's current rulership. They're questioning whether the kingdom's internal changes have invalidated existing treaties. The meaning was clear. The Valdris Empire was using Rhea's coronation, a common woman elevated to queen, as justification to challenge the kingdom's stability. If they could argue the government was illegitimate, they could void decades of carefully negotiated agreements and possibly invade. Lord Haverton stood, his face grave. Your Majesty, this is a direct threat to the kingdom's sovereignty. We need to mobilize our own forces immediately. And give them exactly the provocation they want? Another counselor countered. The moment we mass troops at the border, they'll claim we're the aggressors. What do you suggest? That we sit here and wait for them to invade? The debate raged. Rhea listened, her mind racing through scenarios and consequences. This wasn't like the Western Province's economic blockade. This was a foreign power with the military strength to actually threaten the kingdom's existence, and they were using her as the excuse. We send a delegation, she said quietly. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her. A delegation, Lord Haverton repeated. Your Majesty, with all respect, the Valdris don't want diplomacy. They want an excuse to expand their territory. Maybe. But if we respond with military posturing, we give them that excuse. If we respond with diplomacy, we force them to either negotiate in good faith or reveal their true intentions. Rhea stood, moving to the map. They claim to question the legitimacy of our rulership, so we send representatives who can demonstrate that legitimacy beyond any doubt. Who did you have in mind? Kaelin asked, though from his expression, she suspected he already knew. Me. The council exploded. Absolutely not. You can't send the queen into potential hostile territory. It's too dangerous. Enough! Kaelin's voice cut through the chaos. He looked at Rhea, his expression conflicted. Explain your reasoning. The Valdris are betting that our kingdom is unstable because of my coronation. They think we're weak, divided, vulnerable. If I go there personally, if I stand before their emperor and demonstrate that I'm a legitimate ruler with the full support of this kingdom, it undermines their entire justification. She met Kaelin's gaze. They're using me as an excuse for aggression. I can remove that excuse. Or you could be captured and used as a hostage, he said quietly. Or killed, and they claim it was an accident during negotiations. That's why you'll come with me, along with enough military escort to make it clear we're not defenseless, but not so many that it looks like an invasion force. Rhea turned to the council. We show strength and willingness to negotiate. We demonstrate that the Northern Dominion is united, stable, and ruled by someone who has the courage to face her critics directly. Lord Garrett leaned forward. And if it's a trap? If they've already decided to invade and are just using negotiations as a stalling tactic? Then we'll know for certain and we can respond accordingly. But right now, we're making assumptions about their intentions. I'd rather know the truth before we commit to a course of action that could cost thousands of lives. The debate continued for another hour, but gradually the council came around to Rhea's position. Not because they were confident it would work, but because the alternatives were worse. Military confrontation without attempting diplomacy would be politically disastrous, both domestically and with other neighboring powers. But ignoring the threat entirely was suicide. A dangerous diplomatic mission was the least bad option. We leave in 3 days, Kaelin announced finally. Small delegation, heavy guard escort. And if there's even a hint of treachery, we withdraw immediately and prepare for war. The next 3 days were a frenzy of preparation. Rhea met with advisors to understand the complex history of Valdris Dominion relations. She studied the Valdris political structure, their emperor's background, the factions within their court. She learned their customs, their protocols, the subtle ways their culture differed from the Northern Dominions. And she tried not to think about the fact that she might be walking into a trap that could cost her life and her kingdom.
The night before departure, Mira helped her pack, her expression troubled. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "There are other options, other strategies." None as effective, Rhea folded a formal gown, trying to keep her hands steady. "If I stay here, I'm admitting I'm afraid to face my critics. If I go, I'm proving I have the confidence to defend my legitimacy in person. And if they kill you, then Kaelin will rain hell on them, and history will remember me as the queen who tried to save her people through courage rather than violence." She managed a shaky smile. "There are worse legacies." Mira was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took Rhea's hand. "When you walked into this keep 6 months ago, you were a desperate woman with nothing to lose. Now you're a queen with everything at stake. You've changed so much." "Is that a bad thing?" "No. It's remarkable. I just hope you remember that you're allowed to be scared, that being brave doesn't mean feeling no fear. It means doing what needs to be done despite it." "I'm terrified," Rhea admitted, "but I'm going anyway." The journey south took 4 days. Rhea rode beside Kaelin at the head of a column of 200 soldiers, enough to be respectable, not enough to be threatening. They traveled through the mountain passes, the landscape growing warmer and more lush as they descended toward Valdris territory. The border crossing was tense. Valdris soldiers in crimson and gold armor watched them approach, weapons ready but not raised. A commander stepped forward, his expression neutral. "King Kaelin, Queen Rhea, His Imperial Majesty has granted you safe passage to the capital. You and 10 companions may proceed. The rest of your force must remain here." It was a power play, separating them from their military protection. Kaelin's jaw tightened, but Rhea touched his arm. "We accept," she said calmly. "Choose our 10 companions. People we trust, absolutely." The ride to the Valdris capital took another day with the reduced escort. The city was impressive, larger than anything in the Northern Dominion, with architecture that spoke of centuries of accumulated wealth and power. The Imperial Palace sat at the city's heart, a massive structure of white stone and gold leaf that made the Northern Keep look modest by comparison. They were shown to guest quarters that were luxurious enough to be comfortable, isolated enough to be concerning. Guards were posted outside their doors, for their protection, they were told, though it felt more like being prisoners. That evening, they were summoned to the Imperial Audience Chamber. The Emperor of Valdris sat on a throne that was more monument than furniture, flanked by advisors in elaborate robes. He was younger than Rhea had expected, perhaps 40, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. "King Kaelin," he said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, "how generous of you to accept our invitation." "How generous of you to provide safe passage," Kaelin replied smoothly. "Though I confess, mobilizing 20,000 troops seems an unusual way to request a diplomatic audience." The Emperor smiled slightly. "Insurance. We've heard concerning reports about the Northern Dominion's internal stability. We wanted to ensure our borders were secure while we investigated these concerns." "What concerns specifically?" Rhea asked. Every eye in the room turned to her. The Emperor's gaze sharpened with interest. "Ah, Queen Rhea, the seamstress who became royalty." He leaned forward slightly. "That's the concern, you see. Your kingdom's traditions have always emphasized bloodlines, noble houses, established power structures. Then suddenly, without warning, your king marries a common woman and crowns her queen. It raises questions. Questions about what? About whether the king has been compromised somehow. Whether this marriage represents his genuine choice or some form of coercion. Whether the Northern Dominion's government can be considered stable and legitimate if it abandons centuries of tradition on a whim." The Emperor's tone was pleasant, but the threat beneath it was clear. "Our treaties were made with a kingdom we understood. If that kingdom has fundamentally changed, those treaties may need to be renegotiated." Rhea felt Kaelin tense beside her, but she kept her own expression calm. This was it, the moment she'd traveled here for. The test that would determine whether she could defend not just her own legitimacy, but her kingdom's future. "Your concern is understandable," she said. "Change can be unsettling, especially when it happens quickly. But I would argue that the Northern Dominion hasn't abandoned tradition. It's evolved it." "Explain." Rhea stepped forward, aware that this was either brilliant or suicidal. Your empire values strength, doesn't it? Military power, strategic thinking, the ability to adapt and overcome challenges. Of course. Then you should appreciate what happened in the Northern Dominion. Yes, I'm common-born. Yes, my marriage to the king was unconventional. But in the 6 months since my coronation, I've helped navigate an economic blockade by the western provinces, establish new trade routes that have increased the kingdom's prosperity by 30%, reformed agricultural subsidies to prevent famine, and successfully mediated disputes between noble houses that had been feuding for generations. She met the emperor's gaze steadily. I've proven through action that I deserve the crown I wear. That's not abandoning tradition. That's honoring the principle that leadership should be earned through competence, not just inherited through accident of birth. The emperor's expression was unreadable. Bold words, but words are easy. How do I know any of that is true? Because the nobles who initially opposed my coronation are now working with me willingly. Because the kingdom's economy is stronger than it's been in decades. Because I'm standing here in your throne room, defending my legitimacy to your face instead of hiding behind armies or intermediaries. She paused. Your Majesty, you mobilized troops because you believed the Northern Dominion was weak and unstable. But a weak, unstable kingdom doesn't send its queen into potential enemy territory to negotiate. We do that because we're confident in our strength and our legitimacy. The silence that followed was absolute. Rhea could feel her heart hammering, could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, could sense Kaelin's tension beside her. Then the emperor laughed. It wasn't mocking or cruel. It was genuine amusement. You have courage. I'll give you that. Most rulers would have sent ambassadors to make excuses and offer concessions. You came yourself and turned my own challenge back on me. I learned from the best, Rhea said, glancing at Kaelin. My husband taught me that showing strength isn't about making threats. It's about being willing to face challenges directly. The emperor studied them both for a long moment. Then he stood, descending from his throne. Let me be honest with you both, he said, his tone shifting from formal to frank. I didn't mobilize troops because I genuinely believe your kingdom is unstable. I mobilized them because I wanted to see how you'd respond, whether you'd panic, whether you'd threaten war, whether you'd send desperate diplomats offering concessions. It was a test, Kaelin said quietly. Everything in politics is a test, and you passed. The emperor stopped in front of Rhea. A weak ruler would have stayed home and sent others to negotiate. A desperate ruler would have offered trade concessions or territorial compromises to avoid conflict. You did neither. You came here personally and defended your position with logic and confidence. He smiled slightly. That tells me more about the Northern Dominion's stability than any ambassador's assurances could. Rhea felt relief wash over her, but she kept her expression neutral. So, the troops at our border? Will be withdrawn within the week, and our treaties will remain in force. In fact, I'd like to discuss expanding them. Your new trade routes sound interesting. The emperor's gaze was sharp with calculation. A kingdom that can adapt that quickly to economic pressure is a kingdom worth maintaining good relations with. The formal negotiations took 3 more days. Rhea and Kaelin worked with the Valdry's diplomats to not just preserve the existing treaties, but strengthen them. New trade agreements were drafted. Military cooperation protocols were established. What had started as a potential invasion became the foundation for a stronger alliance. On their final night in the Valdrys capital, the emperor hosted a state dinner. Rhea found herself seated beside him, surrounded by his advisors and nobility, people who'd probably spent the past week debating whether she was a brilliant strategist or a lucky fraud. May I ask you something personal? The emperor said during a lull in conversation. Of course, Your Majesty. How did you do it? How did a seamstress from nowhere convince an alpha king to not just marry her, but crown her queen? And don't tell me it was love at first sight. I'm not a romantic. Rhea considered the question. 6 months ago, she might have been offended by the bluntness. Now she appreciated it. I asked him to marry me, she said simply. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain, so I walked into his throne room and demanded he help me get revenge on my ex-fiancé by pretending to be my husband at his wedding. The emperor's eyebrows rose. That's not what I expected. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, just 9 days, then an annulment. But somewhere in those 9 days, we both realized we worked well together, that we challenged each other in useful ways, that what started as a performance felt more real than either of us had anticipated. She glanced across the room to where Kaylin was deep in discussion with Valdris military commanders. So when the 9 days ended, we decided to make it permanent, to build something real from something that started as pretend. And the crown? That was his idea or yours? His. I would have been content with being his wife. He's the one who insisted I deserved to be queen, that I'd earned it through courage and intelligence. Rhea smiled. Honestly, I think he was right. Not because I'm special or extraordinary, but because I was willing to work harder than anyone else to prove I deserved the position. The Emperor studied her thoughtfully. You know what I think? I think your kingdom is lucky to have you. Traditional bloodlines are useful. They provide stability, continuity, but they also breed complacency. People who inherit power often take it for granted. He paused. You had to fight for every inch of yours. That makes you dangerous in the best possible way. Is that a compliment or a warning? Both. The Northern Dominion just became significantly more interesting as an ally, and significantly more dangerous as a potential enemy. He raised his glass. To Queen Rhea, may your reign be long and productive. They left the Valdris capital 3 days later with expanded treaties, stronger alliances, and the certain knowledge that they'd turned a potential invasion into a diplomatic triumph. The journey home felt lighter somehow, despite the weight of everything they'd accomplished. As they rode through the mountain passes back toward the Northern Dominion, Kaylin guided his horse closer to Rhea's. You realize what you did back there, he said quietly. Negotiated better trade terms? You made the Emperor of the most powerful military force in the region respect you. Not tolerate you, not accept you because he had to, genuinely respect you. He shook his head slightly. 6 months ago, you were terrified to address the council. Now you're negotiating with emperors like you've been doing it your entire life. I'm still terrified. I've just gotten better at hiding it. That's the difference between you and half the nobles who were born to this. They hide their fear behind entitlement and tradition. You channel yours into action. He reached over, taking her hand. I'm proud of you, in case I haven't said that clearly enough. Rhea felt warmth spread through her chest. You have, but I don't mind hearing it again. They returned to the keep to news that spread through the kingdom like wildfire. The queen had faced down the Valdris Empire and emerged victorious. The treaties were stronger than ever. The military threat had dissolved into a strengthened alliance. Even the nobles who'd been most resistant to Rhea's coronation had to acknowledge what she'd accomplished. The western provinces sent messages of congratulations. The council convened a special session to formally recognize the diplomatic achievement. Lord Haverton stood during the session, his expression serious. Your Majesty, when you were first crowned, I had reservations. I questioned whether someone without traditional preparation could effectively rule. I wanted to stand before this council and formally acknowledge that my doubts were misplaced. He looked directly at Rhea. You've proven yourself not just adequate, but exceptional. The Northern Dominion is stronger because of you. It was the same man who'd dismissed her ideas 6 months ago, the same man who'd questioned her worth at every turn. Hearing him say this now, publicly and without reservation, felt like a vindication more profound than any crown. Thank you, Lord Haverton, Rhea said quietly. That means more than you know. Other counselors echoed the sentiment. Even the ones who'd been appointed to replace those who'd resigned acknowledged that Rhea had exceeded every expectation. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. A week after their return from Valdris, a letter arrived at the keep bearing the Farron seal. Rhea opened it in her study, curious and slightly wary. Your Majesty, I'm writing to congratulate you on your success with the Valdris Empire. What you accomplished there was remarkable, not just for the kingdom, but for what it represents. I spent most of my life believing that power should flow through established channels, that bloodlines and tradition were the bedrock of stability. Your coronation challenged everything I believed about how leadership should work. I was wrong. Not about tradition having value. I still believe it does. But I was wrong to assume that value could only be found in traditional sources. You've proven that merit, courage, and intelligence matter more than ancestry. My daughter Isolde asked me to include her own message. She wanted me to tell you that she regrets the letter she sent months ago. She was frightened by what your success meant for the old order. She understands now that you weren't destroying that order, you were improving it. The Western provinces stand firmly with you, Your Majesty, not because we have to, but because you've earned our loyalty. Respectfully, Lord Farron Rhea read the letter twice, then a third time, processing the magnitude of what it represented. Farron had been her most vocal critic, the man who'd led the economic blockade, who'd questioned her legitimacy at every turn, and now he was pledging loyalty. Not forced compliance, genuine support. She showed the letter to Kaelin that evening. He read it, then looked up with something like wonder in his expression. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is the moment you've actually won. Not the coronation, not the Valdris negotiations, this. When your fiercest enemy acknowledges not just that you've succeeded, but that you were right all along." "It feels strange," Rhea admitted. "I spent so long fighting to prove myself that I'm not sure what to do now that people actually believe in me." "You keep being the queen you've become. You keep challenging assumptions and finding better solutions and showing everyone that leadership is earned, not inherited." He pulled her close. "And you let yourself enjoy the fact that you've changed this kingdom for the better." 3 months later, the Northern Dominion held its first Council of Merit, a new institution Rhea had proposed where talented individuals from any background could compete for government positions based on demonstrated skill rather than family connections. The first class of appointees included a former merchant who revolutionized tax collection, a military strategist from a farming family who'd never had access to formal training, and a woman from the eastern provinces who'd taught herself engineering and had innovative ideas about infrastructure. The traditional nobility attended the ceremony with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some were genuinely supportive, others were clearly uncomfortable with the change, but even the resistant ones had to acknowledge the quality of the candidates. Rhea stood at the front of the hall, looking out at the assembled crowd, nobles and commoners mixed together, merit and tradition finding ways to coexist, and felt something shift inside her. This was what she'd wanted, not just to prove she could be queen, but to use that position to create opportunities for others like her, to show that worth wasn't determined by birth. After the ceremony, she found Mira in the courtyard, watching the new appointees celebrate with their families. "You did it," Mira said quietly. "You changed the entire structure of how power works in this kingdom." "We did it," Rhea corrected. "You helped train me, supported me, believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. I trained you in etiquette and protocol. You're the one who figured out what to do with that training." Mira smiled. "That first day, when you walked into the throne room and demanded the king marry you, I thought you were insane, or desperate, or both. I was both. But you were also brave and smart and determined to prove that you were more than what others assumed." She paused. "You've given hope to every common person in this kingdom. You've shown them that their worth isn't fixed by their birth. That's a legacy worth more than any crown." That evening, Rhea stood on the balcony of her chambers, looking out over the keep and the city beyond. Somewhere out there, there was probably a girl like she'd been, working hard, feeling trapped by circumstances, wondering if she'd ever be more than what others expected. That girl had options now, pathways that hadn't existed before. The chance to prove herself through merit rather than just accepting the limitations society placed on her. Rhea had done that. Not alone. She'd had Kaelin's support, Mira's training, allies who'd chosen to believe in her, but she'd been the catalyst. The woman who'd refused to accept that her story ended with being discarded by a man who didn't value her. She heard footsteps behind her. Kaelin joined her at the railing, handing her a glass of wine. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The woman I used to be. The one who walked into your throne room 6 months ago with nothing but rage and desperation. What about her? I wish I could tell her that it gets better, that taking that insane risk would lead to this." She gestured at the city, the kingdom, everything they'd built together. "That she's stronger than she knows." Kaelin was quiet for a moment. "You know what I wish I could tell that woman? Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to walk through those doors. For refusing to accept the story Victor tried to write for her. For giving me the chance to find a partner instead of just a political alliance." He turned to face her fully. I married you to get my counsel off my back about succession. I crowned you because you'd proven you deserved it. But I love you because of who you are. The woman who faces down emperors and transforms kingdoms and still worries about the girl she used to be. Rhea's breath caught. They'd said many things to each other over the months: strategic discussions, political debates, late-night confessions about fears and dreams. But this was the first time either of them had said those specific words. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both momentous and perfectly natural. "Not because you're a king or because you gave me a crown, but because you saw worth in me when no one else did. Because you challenged me to become better than I thought I could be. Because you're my partner in every way that matters." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and for a moment the kingdom and the politics and the responsibilities all faded away. There was just this: two people who'd started as strangers in a desperate bargain and became something neither had expected. When they finally broke apart, Kalen rested his forehead against hers. "So what's next for Queen Rhea?" he asked. "You've defeated your ex-fiancé, survived economic blockades, negotiated with emperors, reformed government institutions. What other impossible things are you planning?" Rhea thought about it. About the kingdom that still had problems to solve, inequalities to address, opportunities to create. About the balance between tradition and progress, between strength and compassion, between what had always been and what could be. "Everything," she said simply. "I'm planning to do everything, to keep pushing this kingdom forward, keep creating opportunities for people who've never had them, keep proving that merit matters more than bloodlines." She smiled. "And I'm planning to do it with you beside me. Always." They stood there together as the sun set over the northern dominion, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, the city was alive with activity: merchants closing shops, families gathering for dinner, guards changing shifts. A kingdom going about its business, stronger and more prosperous than it had been a year ago. And at the center of it all stood a woman who'd started with nothing and built herself into something extraordinary. Not through magic or luck or manipulation, but through sheer determination to be more than what others expected. The seamstress had become a queen. The discarded fiancé had become a diplomat. The woman with nothing to lose had become someone with everything worth protecting. And the best part? She was just getting started. Years later, historians would write about Queen Rhea's reign as a turning point for the Northern Dominion. They'd analyze her reforms, her diplomatic triumphs, the ways she'd transformed government and society. They'd debate whether she was a radical revolutionary or a pragmatic reformer, whether her changes strengthened the kingdom or undermined its foundations. But the people who'd lived through her rise would remember something simpler. They'd remember the woman who proved that courage and intelligence mattered more than birthright. The queen who'd faced down emperors and nobles and critics and emerged victorious not through force, but through the sheer refusal to accept anyone else's definition of her worth. They'd remember the seamstress who became a queen and changed the kingdom forever. And in quiet moments, when Rhea looked back on her journey from that desperate woman in a throne room to the leader she'd become, she'd remember the most important truth of all. She hadn't just won the crown. She'd won herself, her right to exist on her own terms, to be judged by her actions rather than her origins, to create a life of meaning and purpose instead of just surviving whatever circumstances threw at her. Victor had tried to write her off as worthless. The nobles had tried to dismiss her as unworthy. The empire had tried to use her as an excuse for aggression. They'd all been wrong, and Rhea had spent every day since proving exactly how wrong they were. That night, as she and Kalen prepared for bed, Rhea caught her reflection in the mirror. The crown sat on its stand nearby, waiting for tomorrow's council session. Her gowns hung in the wardrobe, beautiful, expensive things that still sometimes felt foreign. But the face looking back at her was her own. Changed, yes. Harder in some ways, softer in others, but unmistakably hers. "Do you ever miss it?" Kalen asked, watching her from the bed. "Your old life?" Rhea thought about Millbrook, about the small shop where she'd spent years bent over fabric, creating beauty for others to wear, about the simplicity of a life where the biggest worry was whether she'd finish a commission on time. "No," she said honestly. That life was safe, predictable, but it was also small, limited.
a cage I'd built for myself out of fear and low expectations. She moved to the bed, settling beside him. This life is terrifying and overwhelming and nothing like what I imagined. But it's mine. I chose it. I fought for it. I earned every impossible piece of it. Any regrets? Only one. What's that? That I didn't walk into that throne room sooner. She smiled. Think of all the time I wasted being afraid. Kalen pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. You weren't wasted. You were preparing, becoming the woman brave enough to take that risk when the moment came. Maybe he was right. Maybe every moment of her old life, every stitch sewn, every book read, every quiet dream of something more had been building toward the instant she'd walked through those iron doors and demanded the impossible. Outside, the northern mountains stood silent under a sky full of stars. The kingdom slept, secure in treaties and prosperity that hadn't existed a year ago. Guards walked their rounds. Council members prepared for tomorrow's debates. Merchants counted profits from the new trade routes. And in the heart of it all, in chambers that had once seemed impossibly grand and now felt like home, a seamstress who'd become a queen held her king and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Peace. Not the peace of having no challenges left. There would always be problems to solve, conflicts to navigate, people to prove wrong. But the peace of knowing she could handle whatever came, that she'd faced the worst and survived, that she'd earned her place through merit and courage and refusal to quit, that she was exactly where she belonged. The next morning, Queen Rhea Varkas would wake early and return to the work of governing. She'd attend council meetings, negotiate trade disputes, review infrastructure proposals, and continue the endless task of transforming a kingdom. But tonight, she simply rested. The woman who'd had nothing now had everything that mattered: purpose, partnership, proof that she'd been right to take that desperate gamble. The story that had started with humiliation and rage had ended with triumph and love. And if that wasn't worth fighting for, nothing was.